Live.
We're live.
Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for April 21st, 2020, 10 a.m. session. There is no public testimony during this review session, so please do not call in. So the following cases have been adjourned or postponed for April 20th, April 21st, 5597 BZ, 7636 164th Street, Queens, 2018 30A 40 Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn, 2017 21 BZ, 3438 38th Street, Queens, 2018 192 BZ, 229 Lenox Avenue, Manhattan, 2019 66 BZ, 15 Terrace View Avenue, Manhattan, and 2019 84 BZ, 45 20 83rd Street, Queens. Those cases will be rescheduled for an appropriate date. The following cases will be heard this morning. 2019 93 BZ, 3203 Bedford Avenue, Brooklyn, 2019 268 BZ, 1938 Coney Island Avenue, Brooklyn, and 2019 271 BZ, 37 Manson Avenue, Staten Island, 2019 184 BZ, 4520 83rd Street, Queens.
No, 83rd Street is the adjourned one.
That's the adjourned one. I just said it was adjourned. Sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, because I was just reading all four that were on the list in case anybody was looking.
Okay, but that one's adjourned, so just
Yeah.
be clear. You
Okay.
read it off on the adjourned list. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
So the first case is 2019 93 BZ, 3203 Bedford Avenue, Brooklyn. And I will note that the applicant submitted a revised plan to respond to the fire department's concern about some notes on the plan and indicating where the fire connection was.
Right, so
Sprinkler
fire
connections.
department has to review that. We just received it this morning, so I don't know
Yes.
if anyone had a chance to review. This is a problematic site for safety and code reasons. And I sincerely hope that the owners and managers have had the decency to keep it shut down for the duration of this crisis, and until the structural and egress deficiencies have been cured. For some unknown reason, there is no stop work order on this project, even though it's illegal construction, illegal use, and illegal filing. The letter from the applicant's counsel indicates that DOB has requested that a post-amendment approval be filed to address code and safety issues, and that these drawings are in progress. The DOB BIS site indicates that there are 20 open ECB violations, that certificates of correction have been accepted for all, and that approximately $35,000 in fines are still owed. These must be paid prior to any board decisions. The plans now look more responsive to our concerns, with the exterior fire stair removed and relocated to the interior, an elevator for ADA access instead of a ramp, air conditioning equipment relocated to the roof. There is a trash room in the cellar, but it has to be refrigerated because they have perishables here. A restrictive declaration was provided, which is something we requested about the fencing. It needs to be modified to specify the type of fence that will be erected, which should be a metal picket fence 6 feet high, if requested by neighbors. And it should state clearly that a fence will be erected along any common property line shared with a neighbor within 60 days of the written request of any adjacent neighbor. Otherwise, it'll end up being disputes and you won't end up getting the fence that you requested. They need to show details of the planting beds for both the front and rear, and specify the types of shrubbery at the front. The ones at the rear are already specified. At the front, that should be low decorative bushes and not just grass, which ends up just being dirt. So it needs to be decorative bushes. Planting beds must have curbs and be deep enough to support the tree ball depths and future growth. They also must apply for street tree planting. There's no street trees in front of this building. They should show a detail of the wrought iron fence at the rear lot line and clarify on the site plan and first floor plan the extent of the fencing, since it's hidden by the property line. Also, they have to clarify on the site plan the distinction between planting within the property lines and that beyond the property lines, since this area appears to have front yards that extend onto the sidewalk line. And obviously that's going to be maintained, even though, you know, I assume that it's a standard for the neighborhood, maybe like stoops, you know, that are kind of predating the revocable consent periods. I don't know, but the whole neighborhood has that kind of front planting extension. So they should show that on the drawings, just indicate that it's outside of the property line. And sorry, just a second. There's no further seeker review required. And I would hope that in the hearing, the architect and the person responsible for ownership are participating in the hearing. Okay, so Commissioner Shanda.
I agree with you, Madam Chair, with regards to the additional comments that needs to be provided on the landscaping detail and the restrictive deck being more clear in terms of when the fences have to be provided. I, at the same time, want to thank the applicant for being responsive to the concerns that were raised at our prior hearings, and relocating the stairs within the building and reducing the encroachment in the rear yard. I'm glad to see that they have put the mechanical systems, the HVAC systems actually on the roof. But I would like them to add a note to the roof plan regarding acoustical fence with sound barrier of STC 28 rating, similar to the note that is included in the elevation and section. So just to be consistent, that note is there in the elevation and the section plan. It should also be reflected in the roof plan.
Okay. So it's the same, because they already talk about the fencing. You're saying instead of just the elevations, also put it on the, in addition to the elevations, put it on the roof.
Yeah, on the roof plan. Yeah, they should also put it on the roof plan, just for consistency. Sometimes in the review, I mean, most of the time the architects are looking, or the plan reviewer is looking at the plans maybe, and not paying that much attention to the elevation. So to cover all grounds, it should be there.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah.
No, that's it. Yeah. Commissioner Otley Brown, if I can get you unmuted. There we go.
I agree with you, Chair, that the trash room needs to be refrigerated. Otherwise, it would just harbor rodents to store trash just sitting there oozing. That wouldn't be good. As for the additional planting in the rear, I thought that actually was a good plan to have 2 rows, one at 6 feet and one at 10 to 12 feet. And it seems like that would form a nice, almost like a green wall of screening. And we probably should consider requiring that in all situations where we want to block both noise and activity from surrounding properties.
Mm-hmm. So double row, 1 low, 1 high. Yeah.
Yeah, because that'll be nice and thick when it grows in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. That's it. Anything else?
Yes, that's it for me.
Commissioner Sheta?
Thank you, Chair. I agree on the noise issue and the trash issue with what is said so far. On the other side, regarding the structural status, I understand that the entire project is in the hands of the DOB. They are reviewing this. And I previously asked for a letter from their structural engineer to be filed. I don't think that this letter is needed now, but if we're gonna be granting something, I would like to notate that in the resolution.
Sorry, what would you like to keep in the resolution?
To mention something about the structural safety, and it's being reviewed, or it's gonna be reviewed and finalized and ensured by the project engineer or the project team, and will be reviewed by the DOB.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay. And Commissioner Shibata, there you go.
Yeah, I agree with what has been said. I support your statements. I agree that the trash room should be refrigerated. I do like the screening. I noted, and I want to say I really appreciate the counsel for the applicant. They were very responsive. Although on a case like this where we have such a history of these the owner not being compliant, I'd expect certain things to get done when they said they would be. And one of those things is those fines are supposed to be paid as it was stated on the last day, and I don't believe they have been paid.
Right. What they did do is they filed certificates of correction. So they obviously started the process, because before they were all open, and now you have to go to a different location to find that they're still open, but they don't appear open on the Opus screen. You have to dig a little further, and then you see that all the fines are still existing. So they're obviously doing something, but the numbers haven't, obviously they haven't paid it down, or we would have gotten a letter that said they paid it down. So I'm going to recognize first Ted, who has his hand up, and then Commissioner Otley Brown. There we go.
I just had a question as far as the site. Do you guys want to know if there's still continuing construction and if the synagogue's open on weekends for service?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
but I don't know whether DOB is conducting site visits. I actually don't know what's going on, so I don't want to endanger any inspectors, but if they are, yes, to do a drive-by and make sure they're not functioning.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I just wanted to make sure, I just wanted to confirm, that was it.
Okay, and then.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Commissioner Otley Brown.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that they did say that they were currently collecting money from parishioners to pay off the additional fines. And I'm not surprised, it's probably going to take a while, especially if they are not attending the synagogue at this point in time. It's not going to be fast. It's not like they have a well of money that's just sitting there. Most synagogues don't.
Right. Okay. It's clear that they're making effort, because we wouldn't have seen it shipped from one place to the other on the website, on the DOB website. So,
Right.
and so they may have even worked out a payment deal, but that their counsel isn't aware of how that worked out yet. You know, they may be working with an expediter. I don't know. But okay, thank you. Okay, anything else from anyone?
The fire department has emailed and said, please be advised, this is with respect to Jay Goldstein's submission on 2019-93 BZ. Please be advised that the fire department has reviewed the latest submitted plan showing the location of the fire department connection for the sprinkler system and has no further objection or comment for this application.
Okay, great. So that goes to further evidence of cooperation by this applicant in terms of the kinds of comments that we've been making. So I think we're finally getting somewhere on this application. I appreciate it also. Okay, thank you. Next one.
Okay, the next item is 2019-268 BZ, 1938 Coney Island Avenue, Brooklyn. We skipped over on 83rd Street, right?
Yeah. Oops, sorry. Okay.
We also received, oh,
Yeah, sorry, we also just received something from fire department, which I'll go into. Uh-oh, what happened? So I'll just go in kind of in order of my comments. A video of the maneuverability into the parking stalls was provided by the applicant using cones to simulate walls and columns. From my view of not being, I just should preface that when I took my parking test, driving test, I took the test in Connecticut so that I wouldn't have to parallel park. So with understanding that, nonetheless, the maneuverability video showed that it was very tight, kind of the multi-point turn that had to be made to get into the parking stall. And actually the video was clear enough to be able to identify the BMW that was used in it, which is only 15 foot 6 inches long. So meanwhile, the parking study that was provided told us that the longer cars are between 17 and 18 foot long. So that's significantly longer than what was used for the study. So I'm not sure whether maneuverability when you're 3 feet longer, 2 to 3 feet longer, is so doable in that situation. There was a queuing study done by Sam Schwartz Engineering that was provided, but I didn't find any of the backup information. Maybe it's there, but I didn't find it, to support its conclusion that 2 valets would be sufficient to handle incoming and outgoing parking demand, nor a maneuverability diagram to show that 18 foot 5 inch long vehicles, which is something they claimed in this study, could be parked using the allocated drive aisle, nor that 2 cars parked in the drive aisle at the front, where how a driver and passenger could egress without walking in the drive aisle, as shown in the diagram labeled pedestrian egress plan that assumes only 1 car at the front of the drive aisle. So just to clarify, there's this pedestrian egress plan that shows 1 car right after the curb cut, after the sidewalk, in the drive aisle, and shows how a passenger would get out of the car and presumably the driver also get out of the car and walk clear right into the front door of the building. It doesn't show 2 cars in that drive aisle and how someone is supposed to get out of there while there's sort of active parking going on. And it also doesn't say, it doesn't actually tell you how all this would work, because those 2 cars that come in during peak parking hours would be blocking other activities, and there's no study of that, right? So there was also a submission made, as Tony mentioned, in response to fire department concerns. And then fire department today provided a very strong letter in opposition to this application,
Yes.
requiring further review. They're very upset and nervous about the fire hazards that might be presented by the stackers and the way the stackers sit underneath what the fire department calls a cantilever. And I'm not sure that when fire department uses the word cantilever, and I'll ask Chief Daly to clarify, I don't necessarily think they're saying a structural cantilever. They're saying an overhang. I think that's what it means, right? And so because they're talking about the buildup of smoke and fire underneath the overhang, I don't think it's because they think they'll burn down the cantilever and it'll come crashing to the ground because there's no columns. I think it's a mixture of terms is what's going on. So, and then in terms of seeker, we have open DOT, and DOT, there was a study provided at the end of March, so DOT still needs time to review that. And we have a comment letter as of April 15th from DEP, where they requested vapor barrier specifications and phase 2 work plan and a HASP and so on. So there's still a lot of open environmental things. And I'm going to recognize Tracy because I'm talking about environmental. There she is. Oops, sorry, 1 second. There you go.
Hi, yes, the applicant did respond yesterday to the hazmat comments. They also, we got a preliminary approval that the phase 2 testing can be done after the building is done being constructed. That was a request, and DEP is okay with that, but they still have to approve the recent submission, which has a new work plan and a HASP for the testing.
Okay. But so we still have an open final sign off from DEP then. Oh,
yes, the sign off would be of the work plan and HASP, not actual having the testing have to be done
okay
right now.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so then I go to Commissioner Shanda.
So, as I understand it, in reviewing the number of entry and exit, the highest number of entry would be during the hours of 8 to 9 a.m. with 13 arriving and 2 leaving, and the maximum accumulation is of 18 vehicles. So in terms of just looking at the absolute numbers, the number of spaces that is being proposed and what will be the maximum accumulation and the peak entry and exit, and actually the most exit will be during 4 to 6 p.m., which is 14 exiting and 6 entering. Yes, in terms of the number of total capacity of what would be the maximum accumulation and what has been proposed, in terms of total numerical number, theoretically, yes, it can be accommodated. The question before us is, can it, will the exit and entry in any which way affect the flow of traffic on the street? And would it create conflict with pedestrians walking along the sidewalks and also pedestrian exiting and entering the building? I don't think the documents quite has gotten me there yet. I think so far the diagrams that has been provided, which is a parking egress plan I'm looking at, it is only showing one vehicle that is arriving that is, and that's okay, because I think during the highest entry there'll be more vehicles entering, and the ones that are leaving, they will be stacked in a way where they will do it in between those 13 vehicles, between 1 hour that will be arriving, that we put aside. So I think those can be doable, but I think they need to diagrammatically show us a little bit more clearly as to how in a certain period of, let's say, even half an hour or even 15 minutes, what is the possible number of accumulation of vehicles in that 15-minute period, and how the maneuverability of the vehicles and the pedestrian conflict would be minimized. I would like to see further clarification on that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, great. Yes, that's a really clear way to put the issue, because I think the same thing. They gave us some data, but then the data only tells a little piece of the story, and it seems like they shied away from telling the rest of the story.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, if you look at it, 13 vehicles that will be arriving in 1 hour, in every 15 minutes, we are probably expecting what, 2, 3, 4 maximum, the worst case.
Mm-hmm.
So do an analysis of a 15-minute worst case and how that would be addressed, because we just need to make sure that this will not result in backing up of vehicles onto Avenue P and will not create pedestrian conflict on the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Brown.
Yes, I have the same kind of misgivings about the maneuverability, considering the vehicle queuing analysis. They submitted, along with the queuing analysis, a little memo that had a handwritten diagram that showed that they were actually assuming an 8.5-foot drive aisle clearance that car used to maneuver. And I don't believe it, frankly. That's really narrow. 8 feet 6 inches is basically like a highway lane. And I just don't believe that you can very quickly maneuver a vehicle into like a 90-degree turn into a stacker. And what we have in the actual plans is a 16-foot driveway. And even that's narrow. I mean, I've been in parking lots where there's 20 feet between one row of stalls and another, and it's very difficult to maneuver in and out of parking spots, not stackers, where the mistake in a stacker is you're going to mess up your car because it's metal you're going to hit. And also when it I also have problems with the parking analysis that Sam Schwartz gave us, because they say that their timing inbound per car and outbound per car was based on another site, 1733 Sheepshead Bay, but they never told us anything about the layout of 1733 Sheepshead Bay to see if it was exactly like that. We don't know if they had double the aisle width to maneuver, in which case it would be really quick to get in and out of stackers. So in order for us to be convinced by that report, they need to give us the plan set for 1733 Sheepshead Bay, at least the layout of the parking garage, so that we could see that it's similar.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
No other questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Sheta?
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Brown about the analysis that's done, the traffic analysis and the parking analysis. In addition to that, I believe we need to send these kind of reports to the DOT to review them. The other thing, I totally disagree about the analogy or the simulation using the cones with the stackers condition in place. So I believe when and I do drive cars, when you drive around cones, you know that you're driving around cones, so you're much more relaxed. You're not shaking. But when you drive, when I go to one of the parking lots with the stackers inside, or even without stackers inside, the scene is kind of scary for me. And the reason for that is, like Commissioner Brown mentioned, it's the conditions around you. You know that if you get a mistake, it's kind of a fatal mistake.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure if the time in and out is gonna be what they showed in the video. I doubt that.
I mean, the only thing is these arguably are professional parkers, but I don't know if a professional parker is more than somebody who gets hired to park cars and then eventually they get better at it after they wreck a few cars.
I haven't heard about a license called professional parker.
No, me either. Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Shibeta.
Thank you. I think we all share the same sentiments about our doubt with regard to maneuverability. I don't have anything further to add.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Any last minutes? Staff, anything? Okay, thank you.
Next item is 2019-271BZ, 37 Manson Avenue, Staten Island.
It's Manshun Avenue.
Mansion Avenue.
Like,
Sorry, Commissioner Shibeta.
you know, like a big house, you know, a
A
villa.
mansion. Well,
There's-
sorry, I'm a little girl from Brooklyn, so I don't know what a mansion is.
Okay. Okay. A zoning study was provided as requested, showing that the cupola falls behind the sky exposure plane, which is what we suspected it would do. The drawing Z004 should be corrected. The site is not in a historic district. You can tell this was sort of done by somebody who's not a local architect or engineer. So it's not in a historic district. Just make sure that's taken off the drawing. It's in the special South Richmond Development District, which is known as SRD, in a C3A zoning district. That's what it should say up there. A Schedule A was provided. I don't understand it. It shows a one-family dwelling unit, use group 2 at the second floor, to be converted to use group 2, quote, telecommunications equipment as pertinent to a non-accessory radio tower. You can't have a radio tower be accessory to use group 2. I don't think. Or I don't understand how, right? And they talked about this equipment very briefly in the submission, in the statement of facts. Does the equipment, I'd like to know, figure into radio frequency emissions calculations? I don't know what the equipment is. So does it also emit radio frequency that should be figured in? A radio frequency emission report was also provided that we requested, and it indicates whether exposure at a given location is less than 100% of maximum permissible exposure levels as set by the FCC for quote, uncontrolled general population exposures. The report revealed that at the upper roof, general population and occupational specialist population levels will be exceeded. The report concludes that the landlord has to notify Verizon 72 hours prior to any work being performed on the roof to allow Verizon to somehow shut down the system to make it safe. I don't see how that's a practical solution. Leaky roofs need to be accessed upon discovery of the leak. If this is an area that has hurricanes and so on, so you need to run up there with plastic or whatever. Site managers can't reasonably be expected not to have a worker go up to check something or repair it for 3 days. And that's assuming that 72 hours is instant response, right? That's what happens if there's nobody there, right? No one comes for a week or 2 weeks or whatever. What are you supposed to do? You're managing your property, and the roof is your major damage point on a building, right? If you don't repair your roof, then it wrecks the floor below and the floor below, the floor below. And the other thing is to expect a site manager who whatever the skill sets of a site manager is, to spend the time contacting whomever they have to contact to get someone on site. And how do you know who to call? And how do you know that that person, and can you imagine calling the 800 number at Verizon? I mean, we've all done it, right? It's not funny. It's hours on the phone to get nowhere, right? So, this situation is very similar to another site we looked at several years ago, where we required the operators of this equipment to install a trip on the access door.
Right.
That shuts the equipment down when the door is opened. Now, there's no access door as far as I can tell from this to this roof because it's a slope roof. So in this case, I'm assuming roof workers would need to use a ladder to get to this roof from the lower roof. So then what would be the trip? Would it be a motion detector? Would it, I just can't figure out what the solution would be. It was very obvious in that other site where the only way to get to the roof was to open essentially a fire door, and that tripped the circuit, right? So, and also, what about the installers of the Wi-Fi and the GPS who are a different company, who also need to go to the roof? So obviously they get wrapped up in that whole thing with the site manager having to contact Verizon. And also, I'd like to understand why the report doesn't chart and diagram exposure levels for the staircase, lower roof, and upper roof the way it did for the street level. So the street levels submission was very clear. You understood exactly what was going on, all the exposure levels, there's a chart. And then we skip to the upper roof where they declare, happily, at least they admit it, that there are high exposure levels, but we don't see any of that analysis done for those other elevations. And those were my comments. So then I go to Commissioner Shanda.
I had similar question with regards to why use group 4 was listed it says existing though. So I guess they mean their club. And what is proposed is what is before us. I had similar concern about the 72-hour notice. I think it needs to be a lot sooner than that. And yeah, that's really, that was my only flag point.
Okay. And Commissioner Otley Brown.
My question has to do with the upper roof area that is considered to be, I guess, a hot zone, so to speak. Will they be posting warning signs and have some kind of protective fencing around?
Right. And how wide would the fencing have to be? Like where is
right.
the hot zone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, which is something that, you're right, that's what was on originally on that other site. There was a hot zone with fencing, but then we learned that the entire roof was hot later.
Right.
The first version was a more confined area. Okay.
I don't know, maybe they could put a fence around the cupola,
Mm-hmm. It's,
somehow mount some kind of a protective barrier around it. I
Mhm.
guess it can't be completely solid because I guess the waves have to pass through, but something in addition to the signage, just to notify people, don't step beyond this point to
right.
get close to the roof.
Mhm. Okay, and then Commissioner Sheta?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I have to say that I'm glad that we asked for what we asked to be submitted this time. And in the meantime, I'm shocked because last time we hear this, we got a word from the submitting engineer indicating that everything is okay. And we could have granted this last hearing without any mention to the exceedance on the upper level. And it's not just exceedance, it's 10 times the occupational maximum exposure limit. And it's not 10 times even the general public, the occupational, which is significantly higher than the general public. So thanks God.
Yeah.
At the beginning, the 72-hour warning is not gonna work. It need to be, I don't know, a process, a warning, a barrier. It need to be something that give people access. In the meantime, make sure that nobody's gonna hurt. The other thing, it's not just the extent of the upper roof. If you look at the upper roof exposure on page 14 of the report, if you look at the legend says occupational limits. Where are the general public? We need to look at the general public limits. These values are for occupational, for people who work for Verizon or a phone company. Where are the corresponding numbers for people like us? And if the blue shading is from 20 to 100% occupational, it might be higher. It might exceed the 100% for general public. So if the blue is extending to the perimeter, and like the chair said, even if somebody's working on the lower roof and he's fixing a light or he's fixing the siding of the upper portion of the building, and he's going on a ladder and he's just at the elevation of the upper roof, he could be exposed to something that exceeds the maximum exposure. So that need to be considered. It's not just upper roof. It could be the upper roof, or somebody is working near the elevation of the upper roof, even outside the footprint of that upper roof. So this need to be looked at. I go back to like the measurements. On page 6, the report mentions that they have done some measurements to evaluate the, I would call it the ambient or the pre-existing RF intensity. I'm not sure whether they made sure that everything on that site at the day they measured, was operational. If not, they need to consider that. For the street levels, if you look at the exposure for the street level, and this is page, bear with me, page 11. If you look at the tabulated values, where it says ground distance 140 feet. If you look at the contribution of each of the antenna, the first one, the 746 megahertz, has 15 and change. The second one, 14 and change. The third one is just 0.09. The next is 0.2. And the total is 29. I look at the third and the fourth, they contribute less than 0.1. But the first and the second almost contribute like 150 times of that. So why the contribution from these different antennas is that significantly different? Is it, I looked at the wattage, the power of these antennas, and in the table that they listed the specification, they seem to be, all of them are 4 by 40 watts. So is it because of the frequency, the megahertz? I actually did like do some digging in some of the FCC documents, and I looked at the evaluation of the power intensity based on the frequency, and I don't see the differences like 150 times between the 4 antennas. If you look at the 746 versus the 2100 megahertz, the power intensity is not the ratio between the 15 and the 0.22. So are we missing something here? I'm not sure. I'm not somebody who's specialized in looking at radio frequency reports, but you know what? I'm an engineer, and I did look at these numbers, and I got suspicious because what was submitted last time actually wasn't that clear to me. Next thing, like I said, on the upper roof, we need to get the not just the occupational, we need to get the general public exposure. In the compliance section, the report still mentioned that everything is okay, everything is complying, there is no issue. I'm not sure how. If they believe that somebody is forbidden from going on top of that roof, and somebody does this by mistake, I believe he's going to be in big trouble. So I wouldn't put a statement like that in the conclusion until we settle on something that we all make sure that nobody's going to go on top of that roof, or the equipment will have different configuration to make sure that the exposure limits are significantly taken down. The other thing, I have sent a plan or a one-page PDF to the project manager, and it was submitted to the record. I'm not sure if you looked at it.
Yes, looked at it.
But if you look at the roof, the upper roof, it sounds like there are 3 major beams. The ones in yellow. And for me, these are like 3 major rays that emit the radio frequency, sending the phone signal or whatever signal. And when you plot these, considering the location of that building, my understanding is that main direction that this proposed tower sending RF2 is actually the ocean. So I'm not sure if this is what is intended. This is number one. And number two, is it possible that we can redistribute the antennas all around? Like instead of we have 4 antennas on one side, let's make them distributed around the perimeter. So we take the RF intensity, we take the exposure down, and it's safe for somebody to go up there, even if we have a spot in the middle around like 3 feet or so around the cupola, we could put like a barrier or a fence around that zone, preventing people from accessing that specific zone. But for the entire roof, I'm not sure how this is gonna work. Like the chair mentioned, if we get a leak, if the owner gets a leak, the first thing he would think of is just have somebody jump on and fix that. And then it's gonna be an issue.
Okay, great, thank you. That's it?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Shabeta.
Thank you, Chair. This was eye-opening. On the first date, we heard everything's fine. We did the modeling. This is all safe. And then luckily we asked for this we asked for this further analysis. And now we've learned that that is not the case. And I think I think we should start considering, there were other cases that I've been here for that we've heard that same story. We didn't insist on modeling, and I think we should bring those cases back. This is, like you said, someone could get really hurt here. And we should consider bringing some of the other tower cases back on based on that to get some real analysis as to what's happening on those sites, not just what their projections or modeling are. With regard to how to make this particular place safe, I've given it some thought. I don't believe a motion detector would work because they did the same thing at JFK. They put motion detectors on their fences or like wait, and the animals and birds, plants, that's going to just cut off the power to the antenna. It may not be pretty, but maybe putting a 3-foot fence on around the roof with one door opening where we could put that trip door. So whoever needs to go on the roof will only go on a certain location because the roof is fenced. And then when they put the ladder up, they have to go open that latch on a fence. Is it pretty? No, it's not very pretty, but that's the only way, the other way is a light switch. But again, I don't think that's not exactly a guarantee that no one's going to get on that roof without getting with that thing being on.
And as Commissioner Shett mentioned, what about the worker who's just working on the siding, working from the lower roof? At what point, what elevation does this danger begin? It could be a 5-foot guy standing on the lower roof and he goes up on the first rung of the ladder and all of a sudden he's exposed to something, because we don't actually know, because they didn't model for us all the different elevations at which this increases.
We also don't know what about inside this building. That those the modeling, at least what I saw, maybe there's something I missed, but we don't know what's under this antenna. 5 feet under the antenna, is that have directly under it where people are?
Mm-hmm.
Does that have, what is the what's the frequency there? What's going on there?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something maybe the owner would like to know as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. And by the way, at that other site, we asked them to model the impact on the apartment below, because some of the opposition to that case were the residents right underneath the roof. So we did ask for that. I'm going to recognize Commissioner Shanda, who had her hand up first, and then Commissioner Shett.
I just want to say, I recognize that most likely that directly under the antenna from some of the research may not be that bad because it usually shoots directly out, but I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, and I'd like to know before I make it. I have any opinion on this.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks. Commissioner Shanda.
I just wanted a clarification from Commissioner Shetta when he mentioned that the reason for redistributing the antenna all around. I didn't quite understand that.
Okay, so he has his hand up, so I'll let him. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. If you look at the figure that I submitted to the record, look at the plan to the upper right-hand corner. You can see 3 yellow areas. These are the areas of RF concentrations. It's like the RF, the strongest, is going along these 3 yellow areas. So my engineering interpretation for that is the main emission direction starts from the top yellow and goes to the bottom yellow. It's like a cone like that. If you take this and put it on the lower left-hand side and just take the intermediate ray, you see the black arrow that I put. This is like the main direction where these antennas send the radio frequency wave. And if I enlarge this, it's going to the open ocean. Is this intended? I don't know. Was that the design intention for this project? If the answer is yes, it's not for the community then. It's for somebody who's probably navigating into the ocean to strengthen the signal in the ocean. I don't know. I can't say that, but this is my guess. If this is the case, my opinion is we have right now, we have 4 proposed antennas. Take these 4 and instead of putting them like on the bottom side of the roof, distribute them around the cupola. What's gonna happen is the shading, and instead of yellow, 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 and blue, and then you look at the other half, it's green, it's gonna be a mix. Probably it's gonna be all blue with some much smaller yellow spots. And if this is the case, then the area that you need to limit the access to is much less than what is shown right now. It could be 2 feet offset of the cupola. It could be 3 feet. And that's why I said, if we get to that point, we could limit the access to just this 2 feet or 3 feet zone around the cupola. That would be much more satisfactory to me than what I'm looking at right now. This is one point. Actually, this is not why I raised my hand, but the other point is the reason we actually requested not further analysis, but we requested details on that was inconsistency. Because when you look at the exposure, when I looked at what happened back in the last hearing, when I started to intervene with the chair on this, and I started to get involved in the discussion, I was actually sympathetic under the impression that they did the analysis, they assured us that everything is okay and it's ready to go. And while waiting for the chair to finish, I was flipping in the report pages and looking at the figures and looking at the numbers. And all of a sudden, I saw the upper roof and I saw the street exposure. And I was like, what? 140 feet away, we got 29% of the maximum exposure. And on the upper roof, there is nothing. And then when I asked, the answer was, we didn't include the upper roof.
Right.
And then I said, okay, include it and get us the data. And here we go.
Mhm.
I don't believe, I haven't seen something similar in the cases that we looked at since I joined the board. I haven't seen this kind of inconsistency. So I don't think we need to be concerned that much about the cases that were granted before since in 2017 till date. I haven't seen that kind of inconsistency. There is no reason to
Yeah.
scare ourselves. But for cases like these, I would ask for a detailed analysis, since we discovered, I was shocked last hearing when I've been told by the applicant that we're the only people who are looking at this, that they are the own consultant of themselves. They author the report, they take the measurements, they do the analysis, they conclude, they submit to themselves, and they bless it. It can be something like that. So we need to be careful, but not scared.
Yeah. Okay, understood. And Commissioner Chandra had her hand up again.
Okay, I thank you for the clarification, Commissioner Shettar, regarding the redistribution. I am not comfortable with that because that's a completely business and need decision that is between Verizon and its provider and its customers. So I don't think that is, I will not at all be comfortable wanting to do that. I just wanted to put that on record.
Sorry, comfortable with what? No, I
With
think
having to redistribute the orientation of the antenna to reduce the hotspots and others. I will not at all be comfortable with that because we don't know what their needs are in terms of, and what the command of what the regulatory commands are and other things. So,
but what if what if you could accomplish the same coverage by moving the antenna around? And that they just didn't because, frankly, having worked with lots of different types of consultants in my life, many take the path of least resistance, right? So they'll just put it over here because there it is. But there's another approach to it, which we've done, we've talked about on other cases where we tell the HVAC guy, don't put the air conditioner over here, it's too tall. Or your overrun on your elevator is far too high. Why can't you use a different elevator? And then they go back and they say, oh yeah, you're right, we could use a different elevator. So I hazard to say that Verizon and their engineers are no different than the kinds that are trying to do it in the simplest way. And that if it turns out that you accomplish the same coverage, and then why not modify it if you're going to reduce the exposure levels? Because at the moment, we're asking them to do something that might be very extreme, like we did on the other site where we said, when you open the door, the entire radio transmitter has to shut down. That's pretty extreme, right? And that's just if somebody goes out because they need to like fix the asphalt on the roof. So, or anything really. So I think before you jump to a decision, you should listen to their response to the questions and see, because they also said there's no reason for us to do this modeling, everything's fine. And then they do the modeling at our insistence and it's not fine. So Commissioner Sheta has his hand up again. I'm just going.
I didn't mean to force them to redistribute. What I said is the way the antenna is laid out right now, the way the waves or the rays are going out based on the plot that they provided, give me the impression that the strengthening, the improvement in the signal is not going to the residential community. It's going to the ocean. If this is the case, if this is not their intention, what I said, if this is not what they intended to do, I would suggest they redistribute, and probably with that redistribution, the plot will improve and we will get to something much better. But if this is not their intention and they say, yes, we know that, we want to strengthen the signal, not for the residential community, it's for somebody who's in the ocean, then be my guest. But you're putting this in the heart of a residential community, that's going to be impacted. So if you want to strengthen the signal for somebody who's in the ocean, put this equipment somewhere else, not here, and make sure that it doesn't impact the public.
Which, by the way, doesn't meet the findings if the target.
Exactly. Yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Yes.
Yes. Okay. I want to wrap this up, but I'm going to recognize Commissioner Chabet, who just had his hand up. Hold on. Yeah. No.
Chair. I do want to. I appreciate Commissioner Sheta's statement that he hasn't seen any anomalies earlier. Although I do, again, I think we should consider on-site analysis on these antenna cases. And again, I know that hasn't been what on some cases we haven't. And I think we should consider whether or not we should bring those back.
Okay. If I were just doing this off of memory, most of the cases that we've had are towers. They're actually the type that the only way that a person could get up there is you need to be like a coconut gatherer or climber. We have very few where these antennas that come to us are on rooftops. Right, because most of them are approved, had been anyway, approved as of right by DOB, and they don't come to us. And DOB doesn't do any studies. That may be changing now because I understand we have quite a lot of new applications. So we may see more of these that are on rooftops. That's just off the top of my head. So
no, and I understand, and that's my recollection as well. Although I'm not, after seeing this, I'm not exactly very confident in accepting just a model of a tower either. I'd like to see some actual analysis. I understand we both believe that that there isn't anything on the lower level, but that's only because that's what we've been told. We haven't actually seen any analysis of it, any real analysis of it. So I'd
Mhm.
like to see that.
Okay, thank you. All right, anything else? We can move to hearing now, because we've had a long review session. Okay, all right, so then let's move to the hearing.
Okay, that concludes the public review session for April 21st, 2020. So now the public hearing, we are commencing with the Board of Standards and Appeals public hearing for April 21st, 2020. Please call in when you hear your application. The first item is 2019-93BZ, 3203 Bedford Avenue, Brooklyn. Applicant is Jay Goldstein.
Okay. Say that one again. 20,
2019-93BZ, 3203 Bedford Avenue, Brooklyn.
please call in.
His telephone number. 1 second.
Oh, here he is. Okay, he's
Got
here.
it? Okay.
Yeah.
I just texted him.
It's showing he's joining. Slow in the joining. Yeah, that's the only drawback with this kind of a system, or the main one is the speed of different people's Wi-Fi. Maybe text him and ask him to try it again, because it's taking him a long time. Okay, we have a new, he tried it again. Okay, there we go.
Good morning.
Good morning. State your name.
Jay Goldstein. I'm trying to have everything. I don't know. It's not working right. I'm trying to have my video also. There we go.
Here we go.
There you go. And
Okay.
Barry Fink your client?
Barry Fink is the representative of the synagogue,
Okay,
and Louis Garfinkel also should be calling in.
Okay,
okay.
turn off your, somebody turn off your YouTube.
Maybe text him and ask him to try it again.
Yeah, they're doing it right now.
It's taking him a long time. No,
It
you're
was-
listening, turn off your YouTube.
Do you hear me?
All right, who's ever calling in, please turn off your YouTube.
Yeah, Zoom was taking a while to call in this morning, so sorry about that.
Okay. You want to,
Can I swear you in? Barry
Yeah.
Fink, are you,
I'm
Barry?
on.
you're
you're
on.
on
I'm on.
there, Mr. Fink? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I have to swear you in. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this board, and to respond honestly to board member questions?
I do.
I do.
Okay,
Good
please
morning.
proceed.
Good morning, Jay Goldstein for the applicant. I watched the review session a couple minutes ago. I appreciate the board's comments, and the majority of the comments were just cleanups to the plans, which we're happy to provide details to clean up, including noting that it will be a refrigerated trash room, which is the standard, and I apologize that I missed it on the plans. Everything else, all the other comments regarding the sound attenuation showing on the roof plan, we'll put that in, and all the planting details we can address as well. Just to confirm, and Mr. Fink can confirm as well, the synagogue is closed, has been closed, and there's no ongoing construction. But I'll let Mr. Fink, who's a member, representative of the congregation, testify to that. But that is my understanding. If he wants to do so now, he can.
He's muted.
Oh, he is?
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Fink, oh,
Yeah, I just unmuted. I'm sorry. I'm new to this. Yes, there is no one in the synagogue for the last 4 weeks.
Okay. Great, thank you. And no construction going on.
Correct.
Okay.
So I think the last real question, or the only comment that requires some conversation right now, is just I wanted to clarify regarding the ECB violations. As noted in my cover letter and as noted by Commissioner Otley Brown, it is kind of a difficult situation right now where the synagogue has been shut down. And with all synagogues, it's money collected from its members. So the economy, as you know, was put into shock over the last 4 weeks. So while we had money for construction and, we had some money for the payroll and upkeep and the people who we have to support through this building as part of our requirements, fundraising for the ECB violations has become a little bit difficult. We've paid a substantial amount towards DOB violations. I think it was in excess of $100,000. We paid, or rather, 2 of the ECB violations actually have hearings. So about $6,300 is still in hearing. That the hearing is supposed to be in May. The remaining $20,000, we're working towards paying it off. I spoke to the expediter. He's going to see if they'll put us on a payment plan. I've never worked with a payment plan, and neither has he, but I'm happy to do so because if we're definitely going to try and pay these off as soon as possible, but it has become somewhat of a little bit of a problem given the current circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to recognize Commissioner Shabeta, who has his hand up. So I can get it.
I'm satisfied that they're taking steps to address the ECB violations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've absolutely not ignored that comment. It's just, as you know, since the last hearing, the world has fallen apart. So we're doing the best we can to recoup. And now that the holidays are over, hopefully things get back to some semblance of a routine where we can make some more headway.
Okay.
It's perfectly reasonable to me.
Okay. Okay, then there's someone in the waiting room with a 917 946 last 3 digits phone number. Is that one of yours?
Let me check if it's Lewis's number.
946 is the last 3.
Yeah, that's Lewis.
Okay.
Hello.
hi, Mr. Garfinkel.
State your name, please.
State your name.
Louis Garfinkel.
Okay.
All right, let me swear you in, Louis. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this board and respond honestly to board member questions?
Yes, I do.
Okay, speak.
I affirm. Okay.
So I think the questions, majority of the comments today were stuff that needs to be done by amendment to the plans, minor changes. We're happy that the fire department is satisfied with our responses and that they're satisfied with the measures taken on the building. And we'll continue, as you know, we had a meeting with Scott Pavan from DOB, and we'll continue to work with them to ensure the structural stability of the building, or to confirm the structural stability of the building is adequate for the proposed use.
Mm-hmm. And then also the restrictive declaration.
All right, I apologize. I'll add the comments that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
I'll send it I sent this one in it was executed, but we wanted the comments. That's why it wasn't filed. Now that we have the comments, we'll send it in for review again. And once it's signed off by the board, we can file it.
Okay. Okay.
Make sure that Kurt is copied on that. Kurt.
Yeah, they were copied on the last one, so I'll do it again.
Okay.
Okay. Do any commissioners have any further comments? So, okay, our seeker reviews are closed. So,
can I ask, I know this is somewhat unorthodox and I understand the board's position. Given the circumstances with the closure, we're presented with an opportunity now where we have the money to do certain construction in the building. For instance, connecting the sprinkler plan and starting to work on safety while the building is closed and while the building remains closed. I know the hearing schedule is kind of drawn out as we try and adjust to the Zoom lifestyle. I was wondering if it's possible to have a shorter span between the hearings, potentially close this out with a very short leash so that something in the resolution that says, no C of O until the violations and everything are paid up. If we don't get a C of O within a certain time, only because it'll allow us to file now for a PAA for the proposed building or the legalization of the existing building. And it'll allow us to do a lot of the work while the building's empty, while we can have the prep work on the DOB side and have it reviewed for the safety if we need to open up walls or open ceilings to confirm anything to DOB.
So a couple of questions. So you can't file, you can't file a PAA?
For the proposed building, it violates bulk and zoning regulations.
Okay, so they won't let you file the PAA until you get a decision here, is what you're saying.
That's my understanding, because the building, as it stands, and I mean, this is a legalization, as it stands, the building is not compliant. So in order to have this in order to have this permitted at DOB, my understanding is, and please someone correct me if I'm wrong, that we would require approval from the board. And in order to file the sprinkler or to finish the sprinkler and do the connection, we would require approval from the board before that can be done. Similar to the issues we have with PCEs, where the fire alarm and sprinklers are done, after the approval.
Okay. Okay, so before I respond to that, Commissioner Shanda has her hand up. Yeah.
I think you mentioned that we have some kind of resolution or something in the resolution that says no CO to be issued until all violations have been paid.
I'm proposing it as a condition of the grant.
Yeah. So,
well, I think it should be TCO, if anything.
Well, so just to put a reality spin on it, you don't get a C of O if you have open violations on a building. That's the whole point of the C of O. It has to be clean. My feeling about it is if we did something like that, it would either be prior to permit or within a year or something, and we put you on a short lease, because in spite of your great stewardship of this application, your clients don't have a great track record, right?
I understand, and I appreciate the I guess the compliment to me, but I appreciate the sentiments, and we're working towards resolving it. That's why I did mention the short leash. It'll allow us to do a lot of the work that's required. I think it'll put the fire department at ease, knowing that this can now be filed and actually connected. And it'll allow us to do some of the other work that's required in order to make sure that the building, or confirm that the building is safe.
Right. So I would be okay, and I just want to poll, I would be okay with the idea that we close this, you submit the revised drawings and restrictive declaration, and then we vote on it at some future time to be determined based on our calendar. But that we're putting you on like a 1-year grant, and within the year you must have paid down all your fines, and we have to have seen that substantial progress, assuming that construction is allowed to begin in any, obviously this time period where only certain construction is permitted to be done, and I'm not sure if any of what you're saying is allowed to be actually done.
I believe House of Worship can apply for essential work, especially I think in a life safety issue, we'll be able to get some sort of deference where we're telling them we want to do it for the fire alarm. So that's why I'm hopeful if we do follow this route, we'll be able to make some headway on the proposal or on the plans and on the, cleaning this up.
Right. But putting in sprinklers when you have demolition work to be done, so you need to do it in different order, right? You're removing some of the front, right?
Removing the side panels. So I think I'm not an expert, but that's for them to figure out. Again, we're removing, a small portion of the side wall to make room for the elevator. So the rest of the building, I think, can be hooked up possibly, and then just add on to it at a later date. Or we can file the plans for the whole thing and then start the work. That's for them to figure out how to stage it. I'm just trying to make sure that it gets done sooner rather than later.
And so just to underscore Commissioner Sheta's and my really big concerns about the structure of this building, you know, jumping to sprinklers when you don't know if you can support the live loads, the structure has to be handled first. So we
I
need
think
to.
that'll all get handled at the same time during the PAA.
Okay.
Because we can't put in the fire alarm to show a building if the PAA is, to my you know, rationale, if you don't have a building, why are you showing me sprinklers for something that's not legalized? So I think we'd have to file the PAA at DOB and then follow with the sprinklers.
Okay. All right then. Commissioner Sheta has his hand up.
Do we know the status, the exact status of the structural review with the DOB?
So we had a meeting the beginning of March, like March 4th, March 5th with Scott Pavan. I was not there. Louis Garfinkel, the architect, had it. Scott Pavan told us to file the PAA to show full structurals, like we'll have to with the proposed plan, and then they'll review it. So it'll be part of that. They're now notified and it's on their radar. So it'll go forward and it'll go forward, you know, with purpose.
Okay.
Do you have something in writing from Scott, from DOB, or an email or something, anything?
I don't. I think Louis had a phone
I
call.
have an email.
You have
I have
what?
an email.
Okay,
have an
could you
email.
submit them into the record?
Yeah.
Okay.
He'll send it to me. and I'll
Okay,
submit it.
send it to you, Jay.
Okay, I'll take a look at the email and send it through.
Okay. Good.
But again, to the Commissioner Sheta's point, you did ask for the letter at the last hearing. You told us now that it's in DOB's court. That's why I didn't follow up with the amended letter the way you gave me guidance for the
Yes,
future.
I don't need the letter anymore.
Okay.
It's in DOB's hand, so.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I would be okay with closing this as we're talking about. Is everybody else, the other commissioners, okay with that? Nobody's raising their hand. Okay, so then I would like to make a motion to close, and we do have a thumbs up.
Yeah, we have thumbs up.
He knows how to use his reaction tool. So I'd like to make a motion to close. I also want to thank Mr. Goldstein for coming up with this approach and for helping your client be responsive in situation where often these are very frustrating to the board and we tear our hair and we get nowhere. Okay, so I'd like to make a motion to close then.
Chair Perlmutter,
Aye.
Vice Chair Chanda,
Aye.
Commissioner Otley Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Sheta,
Aye.
and Commissioner Shabeta.
Aye.
Okay, so we'll put this on for decision as soon as we can, given our schedule, but in the meantime,
I could probably turn this around inside of like a week, the plans.
sorry, Tony, did you want to say something?
I'm sorry, we missed, you didn't ask for speakers unless I missed that.
Oh, oops.
We closed, I'm sorry.
Well, if we have speakers, I'll reopen. How about that? So if
Okay.
there are any speakers on this, we'd like you, yeah. You're right.
Sorry.
If there are any speakers on this, please dial in 646-558-8656. Tony, could you read the case number again?
It's 2019-93BZ, 3203 Bedford Avenue, Brooklyn. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. 646-558-8656 for speakers. Oh, and the Zoom meeting number 317-7.
It's on the screen.
Yeah, 974.
Sorry about that.
The reason I read it is because if you're looking at this on your phone, you can't see the screen and call at the same time. You could when it was a BlackBerry, but you can't now with this.
And I miss my BlackBerry too.
Yeah. Okay. We had, so David Rosenberg must be the next. Is he on this case?
No, he's on for Lobel.
Okay, so he shouldn't be in the waiting room at all because we're calling for call in on this case, but okay. All right then, so I think we've given enough time for people to call in on this. And And we'll put it on for, so what we'll do is if you could, Jay, get the drawings and the restrictive declaration revised immediately to be poised to submit as soon as you can. And then we'll assign it a hearing date as soon as we can, a decision date as soon as we can fit it.
Do it.
Say again?
I think I'll try to do it within the week.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for calling in.
Okay, thank you everybody very much and stay safe.
Me too. Okay, the next item is 2019-268 BZ, 1938 Coney Island Avenue, Brooklyn. This is the office of LaBelle.
Mhm. And we had, oh, he hung up. Maybe he's in.
Maybe he was calling for 83rd Street. I don't know. Let me check.
I'm gonna, Mr. Fink, please hang up. Okay, here we go.
He's in?
Yes. I think they're waiting to be linked in. There we go.
Mr. Rosenberg, are you in?
Yes.
Aviva? Is that Aviva?
Mhm.
Sam Schwartz is the, Sam Schwartz?
Yes,
is
they're
the-
the traffic consultant.
They're
Okay.
still connecting.
Okay.
Okay, state your name, please.
David Rosenberg of Sheldon Lobel PC on behalf of the applicant.
Okay. Here,
Traffic consultant, are you in? They have to be sworn in.
she's muted. Here we go. There we go.
Okay, please state your name.
Sam Schwartz, person, could you state your name, please? Not muted. I don't know why she's not speaking.
I think she's trying to join by phone audio instead of the screen audio. And that may be the delay.
Okay, so let's get started.
Okay, so please, do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your statements to the board, in your statement before the board? And I'm sorry, do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your statement testimony before the board, and to respond as to the board questions?
Yes.
Sorry.
Good morning, Commissioners. David Rosenberg of Sheldon Lobel PC on behalf of the applicant. While everyone else joins on here, I just wanted to, we heard the comments this morning from the board. I am not a parking expert, much like the board, and so with respect to the questions about the queuing analysis and the maneuverability, I'm going to defer to Sam Schwartz Engineering, who should be joining soon. But before we get to that, I think the biggest issue for us now is the letter that we received from the fire department this morning. We understand the seriousness of the issues raised in that letter, and that after this hearing, the applicant team is going to revisit the comments of the fire department as well as their suggestions and determine how they are moving forward in light of the fact that the building is already built.
Mm-hmm.
And insofar as any changes to the parking structure change the queuing analysis and the maneuverability analysis, we will modify those materials accordingly.
Okay.
Ms. Laurenti, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. Is there anyone else that's joining?
There
Just
should
you?
be some more people joining, but I do not see them joining as of yet.
There's sorry, whoever is in, please turn off your YouTube video.
Yeah. Aviva?
Yes, I'm here.
Please turn off your YouTube video.
Okay, let me see if I can.
And someone just joined who has the last digits 012. Please turn off your.
Okay.
Please state your name.
Julia Rata, project architect.
Okay.
Okay. All right, let me swear you two in. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this board and to respond honestly to board member questions?
Yes.
Okay, so do they want to proceed with the technical stuff?
Sure, David, do you want me to jump in?
Sure, Aviva, thank you.
Okay. Hi, this is Aviva Laurenti calling from Sam Schwartz Engineering. And I listened to the commentary this morning before the hearing, so I can go through some points related to the parking and queuing analysis. So I was going to touch on three things. The first is the maneuverability within the parking structure. So as you received, we conducted a video test to replicate the project site using cones to replicate the actual dimensions of the parking area. So as you noted, it does look tight and no one's denying that. The driver was not a professional valet. It was just someone that was doing the test for us. And we do recognize that the car was 15 feet, 8 inches, which is 188 inches long. We did research what the longest cars are on the market. The Tahoe Expedition extended cab is 224.4 inches. So it is longer than the BMW shown in the video. So we did test in auto turn a longer vehicle because we recognize the video is not the longest. So in the auto turn analysis, we can accommodate a vehicle up to 222 inches long. So we can provide that to you for your review.
I'm sorry, may I interrupt? Whoever is calling in on 667, please shut off your YouTube.
And also on 012.
Somebody shut off the YouTube.
No one who is in this call should be on YouTube. Please turn it off.
Mhm.
And then before you go on, because I have a couple of commissioners with questions, I'd like to recognize them. Commissioner Shabeta had his hand up first, and then Commissioner Otley Brown.
In light of the letter from the fire department, do you think it's best to go through this analysis now? Because there's most likely going, as stated by council, there's most likely going to be some significant changes to this project in light of that letter.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a question for the board to determine. We understand either way wherever the board's going to come down on that. The modifications, I don't expect them to be so dramatic, especially when it comes to the width of the driving lane in particular, and those maneuverability questions. How the stackers are spaced out is yet to be determined. And the fire department's letter itself didn't ask for modifications per se, but asked that it go through significant technical review. And so we don't know what those changes are going to be, though we have a sense of where it's headed.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Commissioner Otley Brown.
So I was looking at the memo that was sent along with the video, and it shows 19 feet clear width. That's the drive aisle that was used?
Yes,
car?
I can answer that.
Okay.
The actual driveway is 16 feet. Additionally to that, we have a clear 3 feet to the edge of the columns. So together, a clear space for drivability, for maneuverability is 19 feet together.
Oh, okay, so you actually have 19 feet on the plans as well, because your plans aren't
Yes.
dimensioned.
We can add that dimension. Actually, the full set of plans that we submitted show 18 feet, 8 inches. So that's almost up to 19 feet to the furthest, the closest edge to the columns.
Okay.
So from front of column, so from driving side of column to the property line, you have 18 foot 8 inches. Is that what you said?
Yes, that's correct.
So where's the 16 feet coming from?
That's
The
the
16
driveway.
feet is the driveway, yes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So my comments still stand about the difficulty in maneuvering in anything less than 20 feet. So, I mean, I guess you could address it or not, but I do know that when there are parking lot layouts, they look for as much as 25 feet between aisles, and that's between aisles. And you're talking about 19 feet between a wall and a metal stacker. And that to me is problematic because there's no forgiveness there.
Sure, there's no denying that this is a tight space, but we do have auto turn that shows, it does take a few maneuvers for a car to get in and out of the space, but it is possible for a car up to 222 inches long.
Okay.
You can see some skepticism on the part of the board. So let's just say, to pick up on Mr. Rosenberg's comments, that in response to fire department, there aren't significant changes made to this project. Then you have significant skepticism from the board. Every single one of them expressed skepticism about maneuverability. So I'd suggest that if the fire department is not happy with these custom made stackers, which is one of the things they said, that you consider a turntable or something like that. Maybe that would solve it, because what you're doing now is with something that's 19 feet long or 18 feet long, it's like I don't know how many point turn, and kind of in classic Roman fashion, where you smash the back of the car up against the wall, up against the wall, up against the wall, and makes the car a little shorter, and then you can get into your space. So we're just not buying it, and you've got experienced drivers here not buying it. It's not just me this time. So I'm going to recognize Commissioner Shanda.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at the plans that were submitted originally, and oh, bear with me. I think, I'm a little confused as to why we are looking at a 19-foot wide clear pathway for maneuverability when the actual mechanism of the stacker, the including the overhang, including the lowest floor, which kind of has a gentle slope up, and then the vehicle gets parked. This is one of the traditional stacker types. That is in the way. So when I'm driving, I'm not going to be driving over those things, and so I'm not a comfortable driver, I'll grant you that. So I'm just a little hesitant as a person myself, and I'm sure the valet parkers are going to be more experienced in doing that. My other point is that, let's say, and the reason I was asking for doing a 15-minute interval is, let's say there are 4 vehicles that come in within a 15-minute interval, and there is 1 vehicle that is going to come out at that time. How are you going to accommodate all of those or whatever the worst case scenarios? Let's say there are 4 vehicles coming in within 10 minutes or whichever way. How are you going to stack 4 vehicles and allow for enough maneuverability space at the same time, and for a vehicle to come out? And I think here we are looking at one movement. We also need to understand if several movements are happening at the same time, how are we accommodating that without any overrun onto the sidewalk and the street?
Sure. So when we did the queuing analysis, that was another one of the questions. So we used a probability model, and we have all the inputs that are outlined in the queuing study to explain what was included into the queuing model in terms of how many cars arrive within a certain period, how long it takes to park them, things like that. And so the whole point of the analysis was to figure out how many valet would you need so that there wouldn't be spillback onto the street to affect local traffic. So based on the length of the aisle, we assumed that we could, the model basically said, as long as you have 2 valet, that we have space to fit 2 cars to park while the other 2 vehicles are being parked at the same time. So what we can do is show an auto turn of 2 vehicles being parked in spaces while 2 vehicles are waiting in the aisle. And then the aisle is 16 feet so that 2 cars can pass each other. Typical parking lanes are 8 feet. And that's, gives some forgiveness on either side as well. When you park a car, you're not exactly right next to the travel lane. So there is space for cars to pass each other in the aisle, for someone to leave, two spaces for cars to be parked, waiting to be parked, and then 2 cars actually being put into the stackers. And that analysis where we showed that you need 2 valet, in our parking study, we showed that at most you would have 13 cars entering in an hour, but we conservatively assigned all of those cars to happen with arrivals to happen in 15 minutes. So even if 13 cars arrive in 15 minutes, we still think we only need 2 valet.
But so we didn't get any of the backup on that. I'm going to recognize Commissioner Otley Brown.
Yeah, you just said a 16-foot aisle, but just a few minutes before you told me the aisle was 19 feet. And so the more I'm looking at your plans, it looks to me like your aisle is only 16 feet, which makes it much shorter than your queuing analysis, which showed 19 feet. And that really is problematic. And if you look at the measurements, well, if you look at the measurements at the bottom of your plan, you've got a 16-foot driveway, and you're telling me that really should be 19 feet. But then your next segment is 21 feet, 8 inches of parking, and that includes a 3-foot access walkway, which means that at best it's 18 feet, 8 inches of parking. And if you're taking 3 more feet off and putting it into the 16-foot driveway to make it a 19-foot aisle, then that's leaving you with, what, 16 feet for stackers, and for cars that could be as long as 18.5 feet. So something's not working in the math here, and I think you're coming up short. And the shortness is going to be taken out of the drive aisle.
Yeah, I can let the architect answer some of the specifics of the dimensions, but for the purpose of the maneuverability analysis, we assume that the aisle is 16 feet in terms of cars passing each other, but there is space underneath the stackers. There's like a clear space for cars to be able to, that cars can use as they maneuver in and out of the spaces. So I think that's
but I believe that's probably, then I don't understand how that would work, because it just seems to me like you're playing, you say you have an extra 3 feet that I don't know that you have.
Right.
I can explain that to clear things up before we proceed further. So the stacker platforms, the metal platforms that raise up, the first level of the platforms allows the first cars to come in, and then they get raised up 1 level. That leaves absolutely clear space, basically ground for maneuverability. So as soon as the first level of cars is raised up, there is no metal platforms in the way of the driveway.
See, because when I look at the plans, it looks like you have a frame that's sticking out.
Yes.
On each side of the stacker. What is that? Because it's sticking out as far as the platform. So it seems like when you raise the platform, that would still be there.
So that is, so the 16 feet is to the edge of the lip of the metal platform that gets raised up. And the lip is on both sides.
Right. Right. So doesn't that lip remain?
No, it goes up with the lift platform.
No,
right. So no, I'm looking at the 2 frames. If you look at, let's say, look at the van accessible space number 1. You see the frame that sticks out on the bottom and the top of that lip?
Yes. So that's actually the top edge of the lift. It's at the top of the lift platform that connects, that holds the frame of each lift. That is not at the first level. If you're looking at a plan from the top, so the top bar is what's holding the lift together. So that's not in the way at the grade. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Maybe. So the diagram of the section, which by the way, We don't know if you're even going to use these stackers, because these are custom-made stackers to fit underneath the overhang, and perhaps the construction of them is different. So you don't know whether fire department will be okay with these custom stackers or the proximity to the overhang, et cetera. But when you look at the section that was provided from Lewistown Manufacturing, there is a measurement of what I guess is a side view, which measures center to center of the structural support for the stacker of 13 feet. But then that's just center to center. It doesn't have an overall outside dimension that includes the lift mechanism, or that includes the thickness of the structural support. So what is the actual dimension of the stacker compared to the dimension between the building wall and the property line? I mean, it should be easy enough to figure out, right? That's a problem. We don't have any fully dimensioned drawings.
Right.
We can provide all the necessary dimensions as part of this application.
Okay. I mean, I think, you know, at the risk of, well, beginnings of frustration, it's your job to persuade us that this is working. So far, you get universal, you sort of unanimous position that this isn't working. When you don't provide us with a complete set of information, all it does is have us raise questions. How come you didn't give us all the backup information? How come you're not giving us kind of inch by inch plans? And on one statement you say it's 19 feet, and another statement you say it's 16 feet, and then you use a 15-foot long car, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things just make us suspicious, frankly, that you're not using the reasonable worst case scenario to establish that this is completely going to work. And then of course you have fire department on top of it. So I would really recommend that the team take a more self-critical look at how they're presenting to this board and say, this is a suspicious board. We look at everything you submit. You can see that every commissioner reviewed everything that was submitted, and it takes an analytical approach. And you need to understand that that's who we are, and that you can't sort of not provide us with information, because we will notice that the information is missing, and that will delay our, will help us conclude that we're not persuaded. I think that's one reason why we're so skeptical now, because information gets sort of dribbled to us under the guise of being a full response, but they're not full responses. So, and I've worked with, back in the day, worked with Sam Schwartz. I was surprised to see how little information was provided in this report. It seemed just the minimum necessary to appear like it was responsive, when in fact there was no backup, and in fact there were lots of missing information. I'm going to recognize Commissioner Hartley Brown. Oops,
I
sorry.
went all the way back in the submissions to the initial submission to look at the manufacturer's brochure about this. And the photos show the framework comes right down to the ground, and the framework is as large as each platform. So I'm not sure what it is that you want us to look at that's different from this, but it seems as if even though you're saying you have 3 feet there, you don't have it, because you have the metal framework coming down.
We will obtain the most recent shop drawings from the manufacturer and submit them for your review.
Okay, and if they deviate from what you sent us, then you need to explain that, because I'm looking through that brochure, tri-lift, quad lift, and it looks like exactly what we thought. There is a frame that comes right down to the ground. It's metal posts.
Mm-hmm.
I understand.
So
yes, that's a generic company's flyer. So we will provide shop drawings for the stackers that will actually be on the site.
Well, we
Okay,
have,
so just to reiterate what the chair said, this is getting frustrating because anywhere we look to try and get information, the information is not accurate or pertinent to the case at hand.
right. And just to, and I see Commissioner Shanda's hand up, just to clarify, on April 2nd, you submitted a drawing, Lewistown Manufacturing Company, Harding Steel, Coney Island, 4-high custom lift, dated February 20th, February 2020. And it shows what Commissioner Otley Brown is referring to, a full frame going all the way down to the ground, measured column to column, center of column to center of column, 13 feet. And we don't have the outside dimension, but there's only a small lip shown for kind of a little baby ramp that takes the car up. And but there's a big mechanism in the back, which is the elevator weights effectively. And we don't know what that overall dimension is. And we don't see it in its up position in this detail. So, and then for me, it's also, you're assuming maneuverability where all the cars are now lifted, but that's not accurate. If anything, you'll only have one car lift up into which you might be maneuvering the car you're trying to get into that spot. So I don't really understand that. If you're assuming that the parking lot is occupied, fully occupied, then where's the grow space, unless you're also assuming always 2 empty lower levels for you to maneuver with. I just don't understand how you work this. I'm going to recognize Commissioner Shanda.
Thank you, Commissioner Otley Brown, for picking that up. I was looking at the same tri-lift quad and I had the similar question, so I'm not going to repeat that. But there's something that you, one of you mentioned, and that was the applicants, that is, that, you know, once a car comes in, then the car gets lifted up. What I want to make sure that when you are going to give us a maneuverability plan and the timing it takes, it's not just parking on the first spot, because there are 8 parking spots. And if you're assume 8 parking spots at grade level, if the worst case scenario is that in 15 minutes, 13 cars will arrive in 15 minutes, then we need to factor in that only 8 can be at the lowest level and the remaining will have to be on the upper level. So the time it will take to lift the cars up, the lift up, to get the cars up, and then allowing for the rest of the spaces at ground to be filled by the remaining 8 cars. So I think that should be factored into the timing also.
This is Aviva Laurenti from Sam Schwartz. It was, and that's actually why we went to the other site in Sheepshead Bay, because they have the same lifts there. So we were able to measure the time it takes to lift one car up one level. And so our queuing analysis, the inbound time does account for the fact that every car would have to pull in and get elevated by one level.
So, but then we need that response to Commissioner Otley Brown's earlier question, which was, how do we know that the Sheepshead Bay site has any similarities to this one, where it's very tricky maneuvering? And so the drivers have to be very, very careful and are slower because they don't want to wreck the cars, right?
Sure. I mean, oftentimes we're not lucky enough to get a site that we can actually use. And a lot of times for the queuing analyses, there are a lot of assumptions that go into it. So we, tested multiple times for drivers to use the spaces in the other lot. And we were conservative in picking a time that wasn't the fastest, accounting for the fact that the 2 sites aren't exactly the same, but we can provide the dimensions of the other site just to see as a comparison.
You may need to do more than just the dimensions of the other site. I'm going to recognize Commissioner Otley Brown. Oops, sorry, just a second. Wait. You're muted.
Oh, okay. We should have an actual site plan of that other site dimensioned in the same way that we want you to dimension this. so that we could determine their maneuverability versus this site's maneuverability.
Sure, and just to reiterate, I mean, the purpose of the other site was really to understand the time it takes more to lift the car up one level. Oftentimes, like I said, we aren't lucky enough to actually test something like this for use in the queuing analysis, and we just use assumptions. So we can provide that information. I understand the two sites are not apples to apples, but it gives us the closest comparison in terms of time that we could expect.
So then you needed to be clearer in your analysis that the only thing you were relying on is the time to physically lift the car on the stacker, not the time to drive into the stacker and drive out of the stacker for throughput, et cetera. But the way we read it is, it sounds like you analyze throughput timing, and that's what you're relying on. In fact, the only thing you're relying on is the car lifting up and going down, and that you probably could have gotten from the manufacturer who's sitting there in his factory lifting the thing up and down, and probably that's on the spec sheet. So I'm not sure why you would have used the Sheepshead Bay site for that. I'm going to recognize Commissioner.
If I can interrupt.
Yeah.
I apologize. Yes. So we actually reached out to the manufacturer, and they clarified that they do not have the specific information because each lift varies site by site based on the order and specifications of the client.
Okay, all right.
And also, as we showed, we took the video with the dimensioned areas to replicate the specific site and the time it took to maneuver. And I understand it was a shorter vehicle, but that's a more average size vehicle that we would expect. The time it took in the video was actually less than what we had used in the analysis.
Okay. Okay. Did someone else have their hand up? No. Commissioner Shanda wanted to speak?
Yeah. So with regards to the Sheepshead Bay, so if let's say, I'm just throwing the question out now, I'm assuming that facility is not active. And if it is not, and if let's say, if the dimension of the aisle is much bigger than what the dimension of the subject site aisle is, driveway aisle that is, maybe you can model an analysis with a 16-foot wide driveway and use the stackers that are there and show the maneuverability and how that can be done in certain time period.
We did consider that, but I believe that the Sheepshead Bay site has columns in different areas that it's not exactly possible to replicate, which is why we made the video with the column dimensions.
When you
but
say
the columns are more of the columns of the stacker, not the columns of the building. Columns of the stacker is what we are concerned about. And you're saying the columns of the stackers in Sheepshead Bay is different?
I believe that there's columns from the building that limit the ability to use that site as an exact apples to apples comparison. So that's why we created the other site to do the test.
So in other words, you had different kinds of maneuverability issues at Sheepshead Bay where you couldn't just drive up the driveway and do a 6-point turn and get into the stacker. You had to do something else. Is that what you're saying? The building columns prevented getting into the stackers?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, I'm not sure exactly how apples to apples all of this is.
Yeah, well, if it is, yeah, if it's more, if the columns in that Sheepshead Bay is more of an impediment than what we have in the structure, consider using that and show how you can get it done in a timely way.
Well, that's the time that we did use for the analysis. So the aisle might be wider at Sheepshead Bay, but it's more in some ways more difficult to maneuver into the spaces. So we did use the time from the 1733 Sheepshead Bay site. However, we did test an exact replication of the dimensions of our site with cones, and it was faster, but we used the longer period of time for loading, unloading.
I think you need to then explain this a lot more clearly and the analysis and the similarities and what you took in terms of the conservative analysis from each one of the sites.
Sure, we can do that.
Right, because we have no idea, had no idea until you just said it, that there were columns at the other site. We don't know anything about the other site. So if you're going to do a so-called sort of scientific comparison, you need to give us all of the factors. Okay, any other comments from the commissioners? Anything you want to add finally, because obviously fire department may completely change up this project? No? Okay. All right then. Are there speakers on this? So I'd like to invite any member of the public who would like to speak on this item.
It's 2019-268 BZ, 1938 Coney Island Avenue, Brooklyn. The call-in number is 646-558-8656. ID number is 317-772-974.
A few seconds. And otherwise, oops. I don't see anyone. Okay, so in terms of submission, obviously there's a kind of a long time, there's time that the fire, I'd like to actually hear from the fire department if they'd like to speak. If Chief Daly would like to speak, I'm unmuting him.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. Yeah, the fire department does object to this application. You're comparing the system that they're proposing to put at Coney Island, and you're comparing it to your analysis for Sheepshead Bay. They're two different systems, because this proposed system has not been approved by the Office of Technical Review over at the DOB. So that's one concern we have. And of course, sprinkler coverage is inadequate. I did see the sprinkler plan. They showed the dry heads along the exterior of the overhang, which is not enough coverage for these stackers. And of course, as per my letter that I submitted this morning and previously, we would like application filed with our tech management group for a fire modeling review to be sure that we have enough coverage underneath the overhang. We also need application filed for firefighter access and application filed to obtain approval or an MEA from the Department of Buildings for this parking stackers, and of course that the sprinkler system is designed for extra hazard storage. So
okay.
that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, I see Commissioner Sheta. I just want to note that there are two guests in the waiting room, Stephen Mark and Denise Vista. I just want to make sure if they're listening to the video that they've called in about case number, sorry, Tony, case number, Tony, tell us. Tony, can you hear me?
2019
She froze.
Yeah, so she's frozen.
BZ.
Yeah, okay. So it's 2019 268.
2019 268 BZ.
Tony, you're frozen.
No,
So
not
don't
frozen.
talk. Don't talk. Stop talking. Okay. So I'm just going to say again, Stephen, Mark, and Denise Vista, I'm going to admit you, but you need to be calling in for case number 2019-268BZ, 1938 Coney Island Avenue. Okay. And I do see Commissioner Sheta, but I just don't want them to go away if they're calling for this application.
I think D Vista's calling it from Mansion, so she should hang up.
Oh, okay. So, so the people who just called in. Tony, you're frozen, so don't talk.
Please turn off your YouTube.
So I'm turn off your YouTube video. Vista, I'm going to admit you, but you need to be calling in for case number 2019-268BZ, 1938 Coney Island Avenue. Okay, and I do see Commissioner Sheta, but I just don't want them to go away if they're calling for this application. That's a long delay.
I think D Vista's calling it from Mansion, so she should hang up.
So Stephen, Mark. Oh, okay. Can you hear us? I think they both hung up.
I know
Okay,
Vista's
sorry.
from Mansion, so.
Okay, so I'm unmuting Commissioner Sheta. Go ahead.
Just wanted to put in the record here from Chief Daly for the cantilever wording in their letter. I want to just him to confirm that when they say cantilever, they didn't mean that the structural cantilever. They just start talking about the cavity underneath the building where these stackers will be put. So just to put it in the record.
Just let me just get to Chief Daly. Yeah, Chief Daly, can you just confirm?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Shedder. I guess I haven't used that word in many years, so I loved using it. But yes, the overhang portion, so of that portion where they're going to put the stackers. So
okay, great. Thank you very
thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Okay, then any last minute comments? Otherwise, obviously there will be time to work with fire department first, and then depending on how that ends up affecting the structure, then that structure will be modified perhaps. And then of course, we still need to be persuaded that it's actually possible to maneuver into these stackers with this very narrow drive aisle, et cetera. Okay, any questions, any member of the team? I'm unmuting the team members. Sorry.
I think that we understand what we need to do here. And obviously it will take some time. My understanding is that it's a minimum of 40 days review at FDNY. And then to make any revisions necessary for everything else.
Okay, okay. So we'll let you know on the dates. Okay, and you understand what needs to be submitted, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I would really recommend to all of the team members that they listen very carefully to both our review session again and to our hearing, listen to the videos of them and make sure that all of the points that were made during the hearing and review session are responded to in the submissions. And further, you work on the assumption that this is a board that looks very deeply at things, is skeptical, and that there shouldn't be any open questions, that all the questions that you can think of should be answered in advance of our asking them. Okay? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is 2019-271BZ, 37 Mansion Avenue, Staten Island.
We should have
The
maybe, should we?
The applicant is New York. Oh, I'm sorry.
Tony. Should we be taking a 10-minute break? It's 12
Could we have
o'clock.
a 5-minute bathroom break?
Yes, 5-minute. Okay, a 5-minute break. That means coming back at 12. Let's make it 12:10 because we can't do the math. Okay, 12:10 we return. Can you put a break? Thank you. Thank you. All right, 12:10 return. Thank you.
As a reminder, when we come back, it will still be live streamed.
No, it doesn't add anything.
Okay,
Are we back?
I think we're back. We should be back. 12:12. Tracy back in.
Let me know when you're ready. We're live.
We have all the commissioners, so let's go live. We are live, so let's.
We are live, sorry.
Okay.
So the next item is 2019-271BZ, 37 Mansion Avenue, Staten Island.
And I'm admitting Stephen Mark and who was the other person?
Denise Vista.
Yeah. No, it was somebody else.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Stephen Mark and Daniel
Daniel.
Collins. Both of you, please turn off your YouTube videos.
Okay, mine's off.
Great.
Okay.
State your name.
Daniel Collins.
Great.
And you are related to this application how?
I'm the consultant from Pinnacle Telecom Group who wrote the exposure analysis reports.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
Thank you. And then we have someone, Esha's iPhone, connecting to audio. Please turn off your YouTube video.
D Vista should be calling in.
Um,
D Vista should be calling in, so I don't.
Yeah, there. She's calling you. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
And then Esha's iPhone, could you identify yourself, please?
Ekta Shah. Can you hear me?
No, say again.
Ekta Shah.
Esther Shah. Okay. Are you connected with Mansion Avenue application?
I'm from KMB Design Group. The engineer, architect engineer.
Okay. And then we have Mr. Mark, Stephen Mark. Okay.
Yes.
Great. All right. Please
Is
begin.
this? No, this is the applicant, isn't she?
Oh.
I'm sorry?
Are you the app? Oh, never mind. Go ahead. I have to.
You have to swear them in? Is this?
I have to swear them in, but I just want to make sure she was on. Okay. Okay. Do you affirm to raise your right hand, Mr. Mark? Mr. Mark. And all the others, do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this board and to respond honestly to board member questions?
I do.
I do.
Okay. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, members of the board. We had the opportunity to review your comments from this morning, and we're prepared to address those comments during this hearing. The first item that I would like to address was the comment by Chair Perlmutter in connection with the reference to historic districts on drawing Z004. It actually says special district / historic district, and then it properly refers to the special Richmond district in that drawing.
Okay, take off the word historic district. When we see that, it means something to us. It means you're in a historic district, and it means we need something from the Landmarks Commission. So
And
take
we could do that, but just so you know, that is part of your form. We just assume that you want that the form was supposed to stay like that, and you just put in the reference district at the afterwards, but we could take it off.
Just take it off, yes.
As far as Schedule A is concerned, we actually submitted, per the board's direction at the last hearing, we did submit a revised Schedule A where it would just refer to telecommunications equipment as an appurtenance to a non-accessory radio tower without a specific use group district referenced. But the DOB took it upon themselves, since we did not indicate a use group district, to leave the original use group district in there. So we're in the process of filing a new PW1 to correct that.
Okay. So just to so for terminology's sake, it's not a use group district, it's just a use group. Use group 2 is a residential.
That's how I meant. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, I misstated. Yeah, so since the non-accessory radio tower is not classified in any particular use group, I don't think the DOB understood that, and that it needed to be blank.
Okay, well, I think they may understand it. Most of the time when they approve these things as of right, it's because antennae are considered accessory to the principal use. But in this case, you're applying for a special permit, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So we do have, we were in the process of getting the PW1 executed by the property owner to resubmit that.
Okay, so I just want to, Carlo, correct me if you're listening, correct me if we're wrong about the use group designation on this, okay? Okay, go ahead.
I believe then the rest of the board's comments were all related to the FCC compliance report that we had submitted from Pinnacle. If the board doesn't mind, I'll allow Dan Collins to jump in to start addressing the board's comments, particular to their report.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, this is Dan Collins. It's my company who provided the analyses for Verizon, and we've been doing this kind of work since the year 2000, and I've been doing this kind of work since 1972 on a relatively continuous basis. The FCC established those MPE limits, the limits that apply to occupational exposure as well as to the potential exposure of the general population. And the FCC also provided mathematical guidelines to be used to calculate the exposure close to an antenna as well as far away from an antenna. And under regular sort of normal circumstances, and I realize here our first report looked at street level only, and we did that because the condition of a pitched roof makes accessibility an issue, and the FCC's regulations, the MPE limits, apply only in areas considered normally accessible, which is why our earlier work didn't look at the rooftop as a normally accessible place. I still don't think it's normally accessible. But exposure and compliance doesn't just relate to the calculated or measured levels around the facility. It actually relates to the accessibility of the area, the nature of the people who might access that area. On top of that, then you've got calculations or measurements of the RF levels. And if those levels exceed the level, the applicable MPE limit in areas that are accessible, there are ways to achieve compliance legitimately by the FCC, even in areas where the RF levels might be high. And you achieve compliance via standard RF alert signage, or if that's not sufficient, you go with barriers. And if barriers are not practical, shutdown agreements. And in this case, with a pitched roof, it doesn't make a lot of sense to put signage up, although that's possible. But the signage then would be only readable by people who would be already in an area potentially subject to levels that exceed the MPE limit, as the calculations we provided show. Barriers are on a pitched roof. I'm not aware that that's ever been done, but because signage and barriers didn't make a lot of sense in this case, Verizon went to the ultimate compliance thing, which is to make the area accessible only via an agreement where Verizon gets enough advance notice, and that could be almost instantaneous, by the way, to basically shut the antennas down and remove the RF exposure potential. The exposure, the shutdown agreement apparently has a 72-hour advance notice under normal maintenance type circumstances, but there's also, and I heard earlier that there was some I guess, lack of belief that the 800 number that you get works. But in this case, the shutdown agreement has a particular radio frequency engineer's name on it, his email, his cell phone, and those would be used, you know, either first or in an emergency, but you can get almost an instantaneous shutdown by calling that phone number. There's also the normal 800 number that you would call to get Verizon sort of central network control.
Can I just ask a question? And also I have unmuted Commissioner Shetta, who has his hands up, but my question is, what happens if that engineer whose name is on the agreement quits? And then the other question is, how is this shut down? Is it shut down remotely, or is it shut down by going on site?
Fine. I don't know the answer to the first question, except I got to figure that when people leave, that when their name's on something, Verizon provides the successor name of the RF engineer who would count. And don't forget, we've got that 800 number right to the network control.
And Dan, if I could just jump in really quickly, the 800 number that we utilize is not the 800 number that customers call into when they have an issue with their cell phones or with Fios or whatever it may be. It's a specific 800 number for landlord issues, and also for direct issues regarding for FCC frequency issues.
Okay, and Madam Chairperson, I forgot the second part of your question.
The second part was, sorry.
Is it done remotely?
Is it done remotely? Yeah, how is the shutdown handled?
It is done remotely.
So then why should you have to wait 72 hours? Why can't it be done? What's 72 hours? It should be instantaneous.
Well, because it can be done remotely doesn't mean that Verizon then would have the opportunity to make adjustments with the adjacent nearby other sites to basically provide coverage. While this one site goes down, you'd at least have some minimal coverage from other nearby sites. That takes a little while to set up. Turning off an individual site is easy, but doing it so that service is not affected as badly as you might get with just an instantaneous shutoff requires a little bit of time. But Verizon, I think in the shutoff agreement, they acknowledge that under emergency circumstances, basically you can get instantaneous shutoff.
That's correct. That's my understanding too, is that there's a provision for emergency situations where they can shut it down instantaneously, remotely.
That's in an emergency, so you'd have to figure out what an emergency is, and that's open to interpretation.
Well,
Commissioner Shetta had his hands up. You're unmuted.
I just want to say it's 72 hours because they are Verizon and they are a phone company. If a roof is leaking, you have to let it leak for 72 hours. But this is not my point. My point is I just want to correct the record for a statement that's been just made by Michael Engineer, that the report submitted before didn't look at the roof exposure. I did look at one report and only until this hearing, like the meaning that it was one report that is submitted before this submission. And that report did address the rooftop exposure, and actually the way the was presented was very misleading. It was a white legend. I mean, white everywhere. And the legend had like 4 or 5 colors in it. And what happened is when I looked at the street exposure and I noticed the 30%, I did ask myself, how come on the street, which is 140 feet away the exposure is 30% of the maximum, and just right next to the antenna, it's white, meaning that it's less than nothing. And then I like made this question to the applicant, and the feedback was, okay, we'll look at it. And then I realized that in the report, they talk about the accessibility, and apparently they made the conclusion with themselves, since this piece of roof is not going to be accessible, we don't need to look at it. But yes, the rooftop exposure was looked for. The way it was presented in the previous report was kind of very misleading, and I just took it like in good faith. But even with this report, it's kind of that when we talk about, when we just present the occupational exposure on the plot that is included in this report, and just forgetting about the general public one, it's not giving me kind of like a a good gesture here. It sounds like something is being hidden, and I don't know why.
All right, I can explain why if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Good. All right. The reason that rooftop exposure was not included in the original report
It was,
is that,
sir. I just said it was. It was. You address the rooftop exposure in the previous, but you hided the portion of the exposure at the top roof, at the higher roof. You gave us the rooftop exposure for the lower one, right?
Commissioner Sheda, if I could just jump in for a second. I just want to clarify something, and this actually was pointed out by Commissioner Shanda at the last hearing. On page 4 of the original report that we had submitted, it indicated that the main roof is pitched and therefore considered not normally accessible. And then a conservative analysis of the RF levels on the lower rooftop yields a worst case result. The lower roof it's specified. Then if you go to the rooftop analysis on the original report, where the section of the report that addresses the rooftop analysis, it says the rooftop compliance analysis for the lower rooftop is performed using the Roof Master program, and then provides the results for the lower roof. And then following the depiction of the drawing, it again says, as indicated by the color coding of the lower roof, the calculated RF levels satisfy the FCC compliance. The report is very clear that the report was only intended to address the lower roof and not the upper roof.
You know what? I respectfully disagree. I don't think it was an honest report. The way it's presented, that gave us all the impression that everything is okay and we're ready to move in.
Okay.
This we're talking about 1000% of the maximum exposure on the upper roof. That wasn't addressed previous report.
So I would like to actually look at what we have now as opposed to looking at before. I just want to say, though, that this board, when it gets these kinds of data that build slowly until we finally understand the true picture, it makes the board suspicious of prior information, because, and we just had a case right before this one where we got certain data and then we get next data and then we get next data, and each time it's a little different story. And so the board becomes less tolerant of the materials submitted because it doesn't feel like it's getting the full story. But rather than going back to what it said before, I'd like to work on what we have before us. And before we go on, I just want to recognize Commissioner Shabeta, who's patiently been waiting with his hand up. If I can unmute, there we go.
I don't know if you can characterize it as patiently, but I think that the method that about calling that special line and speaking to that particular Verizon rep who will close it remotely, I think that's a great second plan. That's a great plan, but we still need a backup plan for if someone's, at least that's not going to it's not satisfying me as to whether or not it's going to keep it's going to properly address the concern or properly address the harm. So yeah, that'd be great under perfect conditions that they can make the phone call, but I want to know that if they don't, if the manager's not there that day, if one of the people who are just working there, that's why and again, that was my idea of the barrier. Like for me, that an automatic cutoff, if someone goes up there, that's, unless you can find another way that there's an automatic cutoff if someone goes up there, that's the only way I'm going to be satisfied. And from reading the room, it seems like at least 2 other commissioners aren't satisfied with this phoning in, closing down the antenna method. So I don't know how much more you want to talk about that, but I think that for me, at least, I think you need to come up with a better method if you're expecting me to vote for it.
Madam Chairperson?
Yes, go ahead. Who's speaking?
I took detailed notes on the review period you folks had, and I have answers to a lot of the questions that are likely to be raised again right here, like how reliable is a shutdown method, et cetera. And if I can just run through them, a lot of them have fairly simple answers.
Okay, let's try it.
All right, one question, and I'll do this is in order in which the questions showed up. Does radio equipment emit radio frequency energy? And the answer is radio equipment is not designed to be an antenna, and it does not emit radio frequency energy the same way that antennas do. No. The question about shutdowns.
Before you go on, when you're calling it radio equipment, is that what's located in the roof on the second floor of the building? Radio equipment?
Yes, basically it's the equipment that allows, many people don't understand this, but most cellular radio signals spend most of their time underground in fiber and cable. And the way you get there is the antennas are hooked up to that, which allows the signals to be basically put back into the network so you can call Europe if you would like. And that the only element of air transport is equivalent to us using a cordless telephone in a kitchen. Is you get some small distance that it's a radio signal, and the rest of the time it's in pipes.
Okay.
Okay. All right. We have a lot of discussion, I know, about the shutdown agreement, and I need to let you know that the FCC absolutely accepts shutdown agreement as the ultimate way to achieve compliance, realizing that you can raise all sorts of questions about, well, what happens if you can't reach the guy? But there was multiple methods provided in the shutdown agreement for people to be reached, to have the shutdown occur even instantaneously, not just the one radio frequency engineer, but also the 800 number given there for exactly the purpose of getting antennas shut down. Why didn't we provide, oh, by the way, why didn't we spend a lot of time on rooftop analysis before? And the answer is, well, the rooftop, I think the FCC would consider quite easily, is not a normally accessible area. And in general, while the rooftop can be accessed on a not normal basis, the FCC has always looked at those kinds of issues as something that the landlord, the site landlord, and the cellular carrier work out on their own. They've not typically been dealt with by the municipal boards and by the way, I've done studies and provided testimony and reports in more than 40 states. And almost never is an area like we're talking about with this pitched roof addressed by the boards, because their main interest is basically public exposure, street level around the site. So that's why that wasn't included in the first place. Hang on. And there was an earlier comment, I think, from the chair lady here, that why didn't we provide the kind of explanatory detail about the rooftop analysis using that roof master program that we seem to have provided in the street level analysis? And I sort of admit that's my fault. I don't know how to explain the roof master analysis simply to lay people. The analysis involves millions of calculations that use 3 different formulas and considerations of factors that seem to make sense, but they're not made. I can't make sense of them if I deliver for you the multiple formulas that are used to calculate the RF levels. So we don't provide a whole lot of detail on the roof master program, because the FCC accepts it. We've included the FCC's document as one of the references in this. It's the last of the references in Appendix C. OET 65 is the bulletin that had the math. That bulletin provides basic math on how to do the analysis, but it also says if you've got better information, and it turns out the roof master people do have better information, you can sort of supplement and refine the analysis. Unfortunately, the formulas are just not easy to understand or explain. They're trusted by the industry and accepted by the FCC as best we've done so far. Let me continue here. There was a question about did the measurements we made capture the effects of any actively transmitting antennas in the site or nearby? And the answer is all radio frequency sources that are perhaps measurable. And this includes when you're in Staten Island, some of the RF energy is coming from the broadcasters in New York. And so the measurement equipment picks up the RF effects of all RF sources that have any significant impact on the measurement. So, even though the T-Mobile antenna, for example, is not active, the VHS antenna is not active, were they active, they would have been included in the measurements automatically.
Sorry, can you just stop right there? Were they active? In other words, if they had been shut down on the day of the reading, they wouldn't be included, but if they were operating, they would be included. Is that what you mean?
Well, T-Mobile's own database says its antenna is not active, and that doesn't mean temporarily. It means they're not using that antenna. They probably have adjusted their network in such a way that at the moment they don't need that site, and when they do need it, it'll show up in their database again. And then of course we'd take a look around and maybe do more measurements. But at this point, the antenna is as inactive as the VHF antenna on the same site that is not currently licensed.
But wait a minute. So I thought this was a reasonable worst case scenario where you're assuming full well, that's what we were told at the last hearing. I'm going to unmute Commissioner Sheta again, but we were told at the last hearing that the assumption is everything's working at full power. That's how you come to the conclusion that it's safe because we turn everything on up to maximum and it's super conservative like that. You just said now you're assuming
we're very conservative, but not insanely conservative. If an antenna is not active because it doesn't have a license, then we don't even know what power it might use if it were active, or what antenna might be used. And it's one of those things where we're not, for example, when we do an analysis of a particular site, we look around for nearby other active sites. In this case, you've got the VHF antenna, which has no license, and if it is operating, it's illegal. Now, we're not insane enough to be conservative and assume that illegal operations actually count. The odds are that antenna hasn't been active for a long time and won't be active. In fact, I've heard it may be taken down. The T-Mobile antennas, which are inside that flagpole structure, if they're not listed in T-Mobile's database as active, there's no reason to include them.
Why don't you just put your stuff in the antenna?
Anyway, and by the way, the comment you made about us being conservative and assuming all of the antennas are active and at full power all the time, that applies to the antennas that are identified as active or proposed at a site. And in this case, the T-Mobile antenna is not active, the VHF antenna is not active. So what counts are the proposed Verizon antennas.
Dan, I just want to clarify one thing though. So you're saying there's a notation that the T-Mobile antennas may be inactive. However, if that's inaccurate and the antennas are active, the measurements that you took on the day that your company went out there, would they include what was operational by T-Mobile?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And by the way, T-Mobile doesn't sort of turn off its antennas like one day at a time. They're either on or not on.
But Dan, let me just one other point, Dan. If they were on at the time and it was accounted for, are the numbers that were reflected that day lower or higher than the numbers that were calculated in the original report?
Let me take a look.
Commissioner Sheta, would you like to add something?
Yes, I'm sorry, you want to go ahead, Dan?
Well, the answer is that the numbers that we measured indicated that even if T-Mobile were on, you wouldn't get much different numbers than 1% or 2% at street level. That's about what those antennas cost.
But the straight answer is higher. If you measured and there was something that's not operational during the measurement and it becomes operational later on, the result is the measurements would increase, even if the increased level is like negligible.
But yes, by a
let
fairly
me-
small amount.
Confused me actually, because I'm looking at the figure on page 7 of your report. And that figure gives the measurements.
That's right.
And on that figure, there is a legend that describes what is existing or what is taken into account. I understood this, and again, I did struggle in the last report and in this report, knowing which one is which. My understanding is Verizon is not installed yet, so it doesn't exist. But I understood this figure as T-Mobile and what is it called, unknown are existing and operational. Did I get it right, or am I missing something?
I think the legend identifies. Hold on a second. The legend identifies T-Mobile, but the
And unknown
results,
and Verizon, it identifies 3 things. You look at the legend on page 7.
That's right.
It has Verizon, T-Mobile, and unknown. I was like, oh, Verizon is not there yet, so Verizon is not included. But T-Mobile and unknown are included.
These are measurements, and the measurements pick up the RF results from everything. And so if T-Mobile were there and active, you're seeing the results. But T-Mobile's not active, and so the results you're seeing here. Excuse me.
Are you saying if? You don't know?
I've told you before that T-Mobile's own database says that those antennas at that site are not transmitting. They're not active.
Both of them.
The T-Mobile antennas that are inside the pole.
Yes,
Now,
and the one that you call it unknown, the one that's on the top of the upper roof.
Yeah, number
The
13.
unknown antenna is the VHF antenna, which is not currently licensed, which means it can't be transmitting, except illegally, which we assume is not happening.
But what you measured actually is kind of an ambient, it's analogous to the ambient noise when we go measure for like noise measurements. This is like the
basically, yes.
ambient RF, right?
Yes, that's right.
That's coming from unknown sources, correct?
From other sources around the building, I suppose.
Yes. So, but you didn't do any measurements on the upper roof, right?
Yes, that's right.
So although we actually raised the concern about the upper roof during the last hearing, if you jump to page 14, the figure that presents the exposure for the upper roof.
Right.
Again, it has a legend for Verizon, T-Mobile, and unknown. And this time I understood that Verizon is included because this is the main source now. T-Mobile is included and unknown is included. And then I said, wait a second. How come T-Mobile and unknown are included despite no measurements were taken on the top roof? And I was like puzzled. So
They're included.
This is the
They
issue.
were
with-
included just to illustrate their location. That's all.
Well, wait a second though.
No, the locations are not there even. On the figure on page 14, you don't have the locations shown. You just have the legend, and the existence of the legend give me the impression that the effect of these 3 components is included in that figure.
All right,
And
then
I believe anyone would get it the same way.
Hold on one second. No, I think I need to clarify something, and I need Dan to clarify something in connection with this report. Dan, the upper roof, wasn't the upper roof a calculation because you could not actually do the measurements on the upper roof because it's an inaccessible roof, so your workers could not go up there to actually do measurements on the upper roof. So instead of doing measurements on the upper roof, you actually did a calculation of the worst case scenario of T-Mobile's facility along with Verizon's facility on the upper roof.
No,
And
no, I don't
everywhere
think.
you actually do, and then everywhere else you actually have measurements. The lower roof, the stairways, the external stairways, and on the ground for T-Mobile or
Right.
for whoever's active in the area.
No, I'm not sure that T-Mobile was included because T-Mobile was inactive. The other thing is, and this is, I guess, the fault of the folks I've got who do these reports. On page 14, in the lower right-hand corner, there's a circle with a number 13 in it, and that is the location of the inactive VHF antenna. The location, if you go back to the previous page, 13, it shows the location of the flagpole with T-Mobile's antenna supposedly inside. And I guess when we copied the picture over from the roof master printout, we didn't show or didn't include that little off roof antenna location. It doesn't mean that the specification of an antenna location doesn't necessarily mean that the antennas were considered active at the time and transmitters, and that the RF effects of these inactive transmitters were included. The roof master output is the effects of the proposed RF, the proposed Verizon antennas.
I'm not saying so. I'm not saying so, and I agree with you. What I'm saying is showing these components in the legend gives the reader the impression that these components effects are included in the graph that they are looking for. If not, I would put a note box saying that the effect of Verizon and the unknown sources is not included on the graph shown. So it's crystal to the reader that this graph just include what is coming from Verizon.
I understand, and we didn't mean to confuse, but I think it's mentioned clearly elsewhere in the report that the other antennas at the site are inactive, and we explained why.
Yeah, well, so, this is, you saying it's difficult to explain to a layperson. These are very, very simple diagrams. And it seems to me pretty obvious that you would add a little note that says these are inactive or they weren't calculated in it. Sometimes you need another person to review your report. So this is a criticism we give very often to applicants. You need someone else to review your report before it's submitted to make sure it's conveying correct, clear information, that there aren't mistakes that then lead the board to conclude that it feels like it's being misled. So I really urge you to be more careful with these reports and to understand that though we are not radio frequency engineers, we're all very close readers of these reports. We read carefully, we do our own research to help us understand. And that's where the questions come from. And the idea that a sloping roof, by the way, is not accessible, that I find quite strange, because anybody who lives in a house with a sloping roof knows that they or relatives or workers have been on their sloping roof many times over the course of the ownership of the house for any number of reasons. And the issue is danger to the workers and danger to anybody who might be up there. And this board has experience with a roof that wasn't sloping, where it turned out, as I've mentioned in an earlier hearing, turned out to be an incredibly hot zone. And whether or not there are parties on the roof or just an occasional worker, we don't want the worker exposed to however many times the allowable occupational hazard, because that's the life and health of that worker, and we're not willing to risk it, no matter what the FCC says about a sloping roof, et cetera. So,
and we're not asking you as a report preparer to submit to us the theory. I totally understand that the street level exposure is done by simple linear superposition of the effect of the four antennas. That was clear to me to follow up. It simply could be a spreadsheet. for the master roof, I understand that it could be a finite element model and a finite difference. But I'm not asking you to submit the theory behind that. But there are things that like signal to you that this report or this kind of work is not done carefully. And one of these things is when I looked at the measurements, nothing on the upper roof. And then when I looked at the upper roof exposure, and nothing says that the measurements are not included. So I said, oh, wait a minute, they didn't measure, but the figure says everything is factored in. And that's why I was suspicious.
All right, I understand. Yeah, and by the way, while you're there, I think you also had another question about why are the levels close to the antennas seemingly lower than the levels that we saw at street level far away from the antennas?
No, that was the last report. When I looked, the way I code this is when I looked at the last, because again, I used to, when I design let's say I'm designing a building and I design the building for 200 pounds per square feet. But there is a room that cannot withstand the 200. It just take 150. When preparing the drawings or the report, I make it crystal clear that I didn't design this room to take 200. I just designed it to take one. It's a disclaimer. It's actually to protect you and your liability before the public. And the reason I raised this, I did look at the last report. It didn't say on the plot that the upper roof was excluded from the analysis. On the plot, yes, in the report you might have said it, but on the plot it didn't say that. And when I looked at the plot of the upper roof, white, then white means, oh, it's 1%. Then I looked at the street exposure, and the street exposure was up to 30%. And then I said, wait a second, how come the street is 30% while the roof, which is much closer, is almost less than 5%? Then I started to be suspicious. And then the applicant told us that the upper roof was excluded. It's mentioned in the report. And then we said, no, why it's excluded? Because of the accessibility issue. No, we don't buy that. Please do the analysis and submit it. And then you submitted the analysis, and here we go. Again, the plot indicates that the measurements are included, but the measurements are not actually included. It's a kind of back and forth, and I hope this comes to the end soon.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, me too. Let me go back here and let's see what, there was another question about could the antennas be like repositioned or redistributed inside the coupler in such a way that that would sort of eliminate the problem. And the answer here is that while there are multiple antennas in each antenna sector, and a sector is basically a pointing direction, the fact is that even if you divided up the power among all of the available antennas, if anybody could walk up on this pitched roof and get right in front of an antenna, the radio frequency levels are still going to exceed the occupational limit, which will still trigger the need for the shutdown agreements in this case.
So what you're saying is they do not, the effect of the three, that yellow rays, even if we put them on 4 different faces, like if I move one of the antennas to the other face, it's not going to be mitigated.
No, I think if there was a single antenna on the roof just carrying one of the frequency bands, you're still going to expose people immediately in front of the antenna at levels that would exceed the MPE limit. And so you're still stuck with the problem of how do I protect those people?
Okay, that's fair enough. But let me ask you, why are the antennas are located on that side of the roof? If you take a diagonal,
yeah, hold on a second. Hold on. I'm not
from the top left to the bottom right.
I'm not going to have the answer.
Are they located bottom?
All right, time out. I'm not the radio frequency engineer who designed the site. I'm just the guy who took their data and analyzed exposure. The radio frequency engineer who designed the site is the one who can answer questions more related to what are you trying to cover in this facility? You know, why are you moving the antennas?
Since you have experience in that kind of field, don't you agree that placing the antenna the way they are placed right now, seems like it's kind of improvement, but it's not the land side, it's the seaside. Am I correct?
I am not qualified to make that answer. I don't know what Verizon's other facilities in the nearby area cover, and I'm not sure what the plan is for this site. And even with my experience, I don't claim to know what the radio frequency engineers know.
But isn't the signal strength is related to the frequency, the RF strength, the plot that you put on the roof? Like,
I'm
let
sorry,
me
could
ask you a very theoretical question. If you look at the plot on page 14, and if somebody is standing at the blue side, and somebody else is standing at the green side, which mobile signal strength would be better?
Hold on a second.
While Dan is looking that up, I just want to just quickly note, Dan is correct. He's not here to testify about where Verizon Wireless's needs are.
I'm not asking him that kind of question. I'm asking him,
but
based on the plot he made. If,
the other
if
point
I have a phone and
the other point I just wanted to make is the antennas are not pointing out solely out towards the water. They're actually, the objectives are several here. One of the sectors is actually pointing southwest along Highland Boulevard, covering that whole residential / commercial area along the waterfront in that area. Another sector is pointing more east, a little bit northeast, where the park is located. And then the third sector is pointing towards Mansion Avenue, right there, and then across the water. And then don't forget, then there's also the island, the part of Staten Island that swings around across that little inlet, which is part of the park also. So it's covering the marina, it's covering the park, and it's covering the residential area. In addition, in addition to providing additional improved service to the community, it's also providing emergency service, not only to the community, but also to any boaters that may be out on the water.
I would say the only portion of the community that's getting improvement is the one that's between the waterfront and Highland Boulevard. It's a very little strip.
And that's
Highland Boulevard.
And I'll have to bring back our consultant that could address the RF needs. But that's where their objective was. Their objective was to fill in this area, not north, because they have sufficient coverage to the north.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the community then, like I expected. If this is the case,
well, you could
put that somewhere else.
Wait a second. You keep on phrasing things in a certain way. That's not accurate, because it is covering the community to the southwest.
Okay, so let me interrupt here, because for one, I don't want you to be interrupting the commissioner while he's speaking. It's hard enough on Zoom, and it should never happen during a hearing in any case. So let somebody finish speaking before you interrupt. But the other thing that I want to say is, we discussed this issue of coverage. It's one of the findings, right? So you need to give us clarity on what the coverage is for this area and explain to us why it's being located where it is. And I'd just like to add that now that I know, which I didn't know before, that the T-Mobile antenna is actually inactive in that existing flagpole, super fat flagpole. Why can't you just move into the flagpole? Why do you need actually to be on this cupola?
We will have to actually investigate that. I suspect, and I can be wrong, but I suspect that T-Mobile's antennas are not inactive. I suspect that they actually are active, and that their system must be incorrect, but we have to verify that at this point.
So you can't be saying two things at the same time. You can't rely on testing that says it's inactive and then another statement that says it's active, because that just makes the board crazy. You're interrupting me. I told you not to do that. Okay. So So you can have in one hearing 2 statements that are directly contradictory, because it makes the board suspicious that it's being manipulated, and the excuses for the manipulation are that the board can't understand because we're not technically savvy enough. I'm going to recognize Commissioner Shanda and then Commissioner Shabeta, who have their hands up in that order.
Okay. I would like the applicant to lay this out in the larger Staten Island map, because what we are looking at is a very small geography, and in that always is water. When I zoom out, you know, I think it does lay out a different picture. I think I could be wrong, but that's for, I think it would be helpful for us to see the propagation of the frequency when you zoom out on the map, and just lay that out. I think that easily can be done. So.
This is
And
Dan
I see when
Collins.
you were saying this, Mr. Mark, I was looking at the map to understand where the propagations you're proposing. But I think it would be helpful for all the commissioners to visually be able to see it in a zoomed out map.
We'll take a look at that.
Okay, and then Commissioner Shabeta, I'm sorry.
You know, for about 40 minutes or so, we were discussing how that T-Mobile antenna is not operating, and we're using, and that's being used to make us feel at ease with regard to the testing that was done and why things weren't included in certain testing. And now we're hearing that it may in fact be used. I honestly, at this point, I really don't want to waste much more time today. I want them to get their story straight and confirmed, so that when they come back to us, we can hear one argument and not we keep digging and finding inconsistencies, and that's very frustrating.
Yes, I agree with that. So, and also we have been at this case for almost an hour. So it's been 40 minutes or 45 minutes. And I think often with cases that go on and on, it's an indicator that its team doesn't have its act together, and the board continues to try to dig and dig and dig. The team needs to get together in one conceptual room. And oh, look at that. And Commissioner Sheta has put on our screen did you just do that now?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Wow, impressive. Okay, so he's got the graphics going in ways that we haven't been able to do before on Zoom video, so I really appreciate this. He's showing the coverage, and it's showing that it's only covering a very small area of Crescent Beach Park, and almost all the rest seems to be over the water and so on. So we don't need to have a debate about this. I think that the question is, why is this being located here? What's the coverage? Why is the coverage being selected here? And why can't that antenna be reused, which has been represented to us as having been abandoned, in the flagpole? And I don't think we should beat this horse anymore. So your team needs to get its act together. You need to work together in one room at the same time. And Mr. Mark, if you're the head of the team, then you need to read the reports. And when you have questions in the reports, ask them and have them answered before it's submitted to us. And don't just assume that every consultant is submitting something that will be satisfactory to the board. You can see that we question things, and we don't take exposure of construction workers and maintenance workers to this kind of high levels of radio frequency radiation. We don't take it lightly. Yeah, so I think I'd just like to finish this and see if there are any members of the public who would like to speak on this item.
This calendar number is 2019-271BZ, 37 Mansion Avenue, Staten Island.
Call in number 646-558-8656, 558-8656, and the meeting ID number 317-6 772-974. We'll give a few seconds. I see Commissioner Sheta has his hand up. I'll recognize him while we see if we have any members of the public who would like to speak. Go ahead.
I didn't mention this earlier today, but last hearing, we did ask a letter from a structural engineer to assure us that if this cupola is going to be installed, the forces, especially the wind forces from the cupola, is going to be taken by the roof. What happened this submission is I got a data sheet for the structural shapes that's going to be used to build the cupola in addition to some structural plan. We don't want to review anything related to the structural. I just need an assurance from a professional that if this is going to be built, the building is going to be able to handle the loads from whatever is proposed. And I believe this is not urgent now, because I believe that the entire configuration of this cupola need to be like looked at one more time because of the issues we just raised.
Right. And I had also asked for more, yeah, okay, just one second. I had also asked for more information on the aesthetics of it, and I don't think that we got anything. It says designed by others, and I don't believe there was a submission that showed what the specific materials are. It keeps talking about this transparent material. I know it's a radio frequency transparent material, but it's not clear what that is or.
I believe it's TFRB. I thought it's TFRP.
TFRP?
No, GFRP, glass fiber reinforced plastic. That's my understanding.
Okay, so that's like something cheesy. Okay, yeah, I'm unmuting Mr. Mark. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. That's not accurate. It's FRP, fiberglass reinforced plastic, is part of the material. We did submit, as part of our submission, a letter from Stephen Bray dated March 31st, which had a variety of documents attached to it, including a drawing indicating the materials that would be utilized for the cupola, and also and then two separate attachments, one from Stealth, Raycap Stealth, which describes their material that's utilized to create the paneling around the cupola, which will be affixed to the structural members. And then we also have a separate attachment from Bedford, which creates the structural members from FRP material that provides details, specific details and specs. If I recall correctly, my impression from the last hearing was that you were looking for specs and details like this, and that's what we provided. And if I could just clarify also, the rooftop material is, excuse me one second. The rooftop material is made from hardcore, hold on a second, hard-coated foam, which would then also be attached to the structural members. And then
Hard-coated foam on the exterior? That's known as EFIS, forbidden in this board, not allowed.
Hard-coated foam is not allowed?
No, that's called EFIS. It's basically styrofoam with a painting over it. One of the worst materials ever invented. Looks terrible, wears terrible, should never be used on any projects. But I don't represent the manufacturer. However, I don't want to see it on any BSA project.
I will have to confer if that is actually accurate, if the hard-coated foam in this instance is EFIS. If it is, then I'll speak to our designer and confirm.
Okay.
What you just mentioned is the same as I mentioned before. GFRP is the scientific abbreviation for the glass fiber or the fiberglass. Same material that I mentioned.
Okay.
So when I look at these drawings that's submitted by Stephen Bray, They just say proposed cupola by Stealth. They don't provide drawings by Stealth.
We weren't able to acquire the drawings from Stealth at this time due to the issues with the coronavirus.
Okay, so the correct answer to my question was, we didn't give them to you, not we gave them to you. I asked for the design drawings of the cupola, and you said we gave them to you.
I was on
The specs, but you didn't, because Stealth is the one who's making the cupola. Instead, what you gave me is well, what I have to say is a set of cut sheets, which don't tell me which thing in the cut sheet is going to be used. So it's just FRP versus traditional materials, and I don't know which one is being proposed to be used or whatever. And then, yeah, you're not really telling me anything about the design because we're looking at the aesthetics, right?
Well,
so here we go again, like minimal. No, I don't even want to have a discussion about this where you defend yourself. You're not submitting complete data. Anytime you don't submit complete data and you represent that you have, it makes us angry or frustrated or skeptical. And so rather than defend yourselves and saying, I'm sorry, or I promise, or we will, just do it. Understand we are a critical board, and we expect complete submissions in response to our questions. I don't need to have a debate about it. Commissioner Cabetta, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to express my frustration again. Every issue we bring up tends to be a 20-minute story, and it changes. I think that they should go back and be prepared for next time. And I don't think that talking any more about it now is going to be for the service of anyone.
Right, I agree. Okay, so I would like to finish with this hearing. We already asked for speakers from the members of the public. No one called in. And so let's move on. You have your marching orders. They're extensive. Everyone should be listening to the videotape of this hearing and the review session, and make sure you responded 500% to every single issue that was raised. Otherwise, you will see a very angry board the next time. And we have denied applications for failure to cooperate. So you need to cooperate and give us what we need, okay? All right, so we'll assign a continuation subsequent to this hearing. We can't do it simultaneously while we're on these Zoom videos. Okay, we'll assign you a date. Okay, thank you everyone for calling in.
So this concludes the public hearing for April 20th, 2020, April 21st, I'm sorry, 2020, 10 a.m. session. We will resume with the following cases, I guess, at 2 o'clock.
Yes.
2019-202 BZ, 2218 East 3rd Street, Brooklyn, 2019-272 BZ, 600 6th Avenue, Manhattan, 2019-296 BZ, 84 Franklin Street, Manhattan, and 2019-297 BZ, 588 5th Avenue, Manhattan.
Thank you, everyone. See you later.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.